going to share a screen with you. And that was just a warning that we're recording this session, which I'll explain to you in a little minute. So let me just share this so you can see us this morning. You should still hopefully be able to see me and my slides now. See a few familiar faces coming through the door. That's lovely. Morning, Anna. Morning, Alicia. Hi, Caroline. Nice to see you. Who else have we got? Hi, Rebecca. Good to see you. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Vicky. So we've got about 200 people have registered for the webinar this morning. I'm not sure how many people will listen live, and I know that we kind of gave the option that you could dip in and dip out of this, so a few people might join us a little bit later on this morning. But it looks like we've got about 50 people with us as we start off the sessions this morning. So for those of you that I don't know, as I say, my name is Nicole Vasquez, which I think it says loud and clear down here at the bottom of my box. And I run a company called Worthwhile Training, who we are also the hosts of Lone Worker Safety Live, which is normally actually a live event that runs every year face to face. But for the last couple of years, as I'm sure you're all very, very aware, things have been slightly different. So yet again, this year, we're running virtually a conference with you this morning. So just to check that everything's kind of working okay, can I get a thumbs up and give us a wave, hands up from everybody that's out there? Can you hear me okay? Can you see the slides, and can you see me at this particular point in time? So I'm getting a few hands up there, so that's looking good. If you do have problems at all, we've got Louise is there in the background. And she's going to be helping us out technically this morning. So just put a message in the chat box to Louise and she'll see if she can help you out this morning. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Alan. Sylvia, good to see you this morning. So let's have a little start off what we're talking about today. Lone Worker Safety Live, what is it that we deal with? Well, if you're looking at lone, remote, hybrid workers, whatever is the phrase that you use within your company, and you want to look at how to protect their safety, security or well-being, then you are definitely in the right place today. We are really pleased to be sponsored this morning by Solo Protect, Lone Alert and Reliance Protect, who are three of our key sponsors and exhibitors when we have something that looks more like a real conference, which obviously at the moment doesn't, but you know, when it normally looks a bit more like this with people in the room, they are exhibitors at that event as well. So that was plan A. We were supposed to be at Lord's Cricket Ground today. It's a gorgeous day and I would love to have been there, because part of our day ended on those people who were lucky enough to win a competition who got a free tour of Lord's. But we're still going to do that, but we're just not going to do it until 11th of October 2022. So if anybody is interested in that, then visit our website, loneworkersafetylive.com, and you'll find out information about who's speaking, how you can get tickets, etc. And if you stay around to the end of this event, we will give you a code to get a discount off of the delegate fee that applies to you this morning for next year. So just so that you know I'm not ignoring you, I've got another screen over here, which means that occasionally I'm going to be kind of looking at that screen over there. I'm not kind of looking out the window and waving at the postie, although I might do that at some point during the day. Last time we did one of these, I had my windows cleaned halfway through, which kind of really completely threw me. But hopefully it'll all go smoothly this morning. And I say Louise is there in the background. If anybody does have any issues, please let her know. So let's talk you through where we're heading this morning. I'm going to do a very brief introduction in a minute or two, just around kind of the risks that are faced by lone workers and why we as businesses should be aware of them and take steps to manage them in an effective way. And then I'm really proud to introduce Barbara Hockey from the HSE. The HSE have been involved with Lone Worker Safety Live for a few years now. And it's great to have her back again this morning, and she's going to give us an update on the guidance on lone and remote working, and also guidance on home working, which I think is something that maybe a couple of years ago most of us would kind of gone, oh yeah, there's just a few people do that in our business. But I bet for now there's a lot more people still doing it, and looking into the future it's probably going to be something that's continued. So I would really emphasize the fact that that's going to be an important session this morning, and make sure that you've got pen and paper so you can take notes. Nigel Heaton from Human Applications is then going to be joining us, and anybody that's heard Nigel speak before will know that he is a fount of all knowledge in terms of health and safety kind of regulations, requirements, etc. And a real nice follow on from the HSE, sort of looking at, okay, this is what we need to do. So Nigel will talk about how we can do it and give you some kind of effective strategies for risk managing this whole process. We're then welcoming Robert Harris from Solo Protect, who's going to be just really looking at the idea of lone worker safety devices, but more importantly, kind of how you can make sure that you are making the right choices for your lone workers and your business. There are an awful lot of apps, devices, systems out there at the moment. We even heard that, you know, Priti Patel is looking at this 888 thing, which will go out there for lone females, although I'm sure we've all got our views about that. But it's kind of very confusing as to what they look like, what they do. So Rob's going to talk you through kind of maybe some ways to think about what works for you and your business. And then we're going to have Karen McDonald, Dr. Karen McDonald from Rossby, Scotland, who's going to be looking at one of the really important parts of lone working, and that's kind of fatigue and driving and the impact that that has on the risk to our lone workers, and also how we can look at managing that risk to our drivers who are out and about. And that might be whether you've got somebody that's out there doing delivery drivers, which again, that's a growing area. It could be that you've got people who are traveling out and about visiting clients, whatever it might be. It's an important topic, and again, I would encourage you to stay and listen to that one. Chris Allcard is joining us at 11:50, and he's going to be talking about body-worn video, again, another area that is growing within the lone worker field, but also not just in lone worker, but if you have people who are facing violence and aggression, abuse, etc. on the front line, this might be something that you've looked at. And so Chris is going to help us look at kind of the considerations if we're going to deploy body-worn videos within our businesses. And then Matt Colley from Lone Alert is going to be looking at how we actually embed these lone worker systems. We will go out and talk to an awful lot of organisations who have these systems and have spent a lot of money on them, but then for one reason or another, their lone workers are not buying into it and are not using them in the way perhaps that could be really, really useful to them. So he's going to be sharing a real world experience from one of their clients about what they did to ensure that their money was well spent and that people actually did use it to the end that it was intended for. And then finally, but I would say as importantly as all of our other speakers, we've got Heather Beach from the Healthy Work Company, who's going to be talking about long-term well-being for our lone workers, our isolated workers, those people who are stressed because of the decisions that they have to make, because there's nobody there to kind of ask and to share these issues with. And again, that's kind of remote hybrid workers, lone workers, home workers, whatever you want to call them. And we'll explore that in a little minute or two. So lots of things for you to listen to and get engaged with this morning. I'll talk to you about how you can ask your questions and pose those to our experts as we go through the session. So we won't be taking breaks, as I've said, but feel free to kind of dip in, dip out, leave us on in the background if you're doing other stuff. We will be recording this session. So those of you that joined right at the very beginning heard that kind of little warning that this is being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel after the event. So if you don't manage to stay with us for the whole morning, there's something you really want to do today, but you also really want to take part in this, you can also come back and listen. Of course, the opportunity to ask questions is gone at that point. If you do ask questions this morning, can I ask you all to use the Q&A section in our box? You should find those in your control panel, Q&A, it says. If you just put your question in there, you can do that anonymously if you want, or you can have your name on it. And then Louise will help me to pose those questions to our experts as we go through the session this morning. What else do I need to tell you? There's a couple of polls coming your ways. They're anonymous, so feel free to kind of answer honestly. We won't see who's answered what. We'll just kind of know the number of people. So that's kind of about it. So any questions to start with, get typing away in that Q&A box. That will be a good place to kind of put those sessions just to get started. Okay, let's have a look. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, yes, final thing, just to remind you, because we've got quite a few speakers this morning, it would be really helpful if when you put your questions in, you put the name of the the name of the person that your question is aimed for. That would be really, really helpful. Excellent, thank you. All right, so look, let's move on. I've got a poll for you, a question for you to start us off with. So bear with me a second and I will pull that poll up. So you should now see a poll come up on your screen. If you don't see a poll, it's because you've got pop-ups blocked on your laptop or your computer or whatever it is that you're using. I just wondered really how many of the people that we've got with us are lone workers or responsible for lone workers. You've got a multiple choice on this, so you can kind of, if you are both a lone worker yourself and responsible for lone workers, then you can tick both of those. There's another one that says neither, but you're interested in the subject. And there's one at the bottom that says, I'm not sure what a lone remote hybrid worker is. So if that's you, maybe you'll learn a little bit today. So I'll give you a few minutes. We've got about 80 people online at the moment. So just letting a few of you vote, and then we will share that poll. Good morning, Barbara. Good morning, Nigel. I see you've joined us nice and early this morning, which is good because we're going to have a little chat with you in a minute or two.
Wow. Okay. Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, sounding a bit hoarse this morning, Nigel.
Nothing COVID-y, I assure you. More the cold air.
Oh dear. Okay, I'm glad to hear it's nothing too serious then in that case. Okay, so let's look at see what people said, who we've got online this morning, just out of interest. I'm going to share these results with you so that you can see. So it's a pretty even split. We've got about 68% of people said that they're responsible for lone, remote and hybrid workers. 50% of you, that's half of the group then, are actually lone workers yourselves. And then a few people who are here because they're interested in the subject. And it looks like we've got a really kind of engaged and knowledgeable audience today, because nobody said that they're not sure what a lone or hybrid or remote worker is. So that's really good to have you on board with us this morning. Just interesting to see those statistics. So that's fantastic. So look, let's start off. I said that I kind of was going to kick this whole session off this morning. Safety and security and well-being. They're the three areas that we kind of focus on, if you like, in terms of the Lone Worker Safety Live event. It's also what we focus on as an organisation. And the last time I did one of these, I got a few people afterwards saying to me, well, what do you actually do? Because you introduced everybody else, but you didn't say what you did. So just as a quick overview, Worthwhile Training is an organisation that's been going for over 20 years now. As I say, we do host and run Lone Worker Safety Live. But in our day job, as it were, the thing that we do from day to day is actually going out and delivering support and training to organisations, helping them in the areas that you can see there in that kind of bullet point. And we do that through drama-based, forum theatre-focused workshops, they're experiential workshops, but we also make lone worker training films, we make videos for all sorts of areas, and also e-learning sessions as well. And there's just a few examples of the kind of people that we've worked with over the last couple of years. It's been an interesting couple of years. Most of our work has gone online, as you can imagine, but I keep calling that in the meantime training, because especially for things like violence and aggression, dealing with conflict, you can't really teach people how to do that online. You have to be in the room and have that kind of experiential moment, which is what we pride ourselves in doing really, really well. So our area, one of our areas of kind of specialism is this idea of lone workers. But what do we mean by lone worker? And I thought it was interesting that a lot of you said, yes, I'm a lone worker, but even more said you're responsible for them. And I wonder what you call them within your business. There's lots of different terms that people use now. This idea of remote workers being different. They might be those people who are out and about in the community, maybe visiting in other people's homes. You've got flexible workers, which I'm never quite sure what that means, because I'm never sure that's physically flexible or whether that means mentally flexible. Or it could be that it's location flexible or location independent, which seems to be a phrase that has popped up over the last couple of years, as has hybrid workers. And I guess that means people who are working at home some of the time, coming into the office some of the time, maybe out and about. You know, it's a real kind of collection of different kind of terms here. And I've seen more than just that small list there. But if we kind of look at those kind of ideas and say, well, what does that actually mean? If we've got kind of anything like guidance from the HSE, then this is it. It's those who work by themselves without close or direct supervision. And what I really love about this is it leaves it open-ended, but also it doesn't put a time frame on it. So it's not like you have to be on your own for half a day or a full day or 3 days a week. It could be at any point when you are working by yourself. We have one client who actually has got a really clever definition of lone workers, which I'll share with you. And they change it because they say, actually, sometimes we have people who go out with apprentices. So we would class in that situation the apprentice not to be a lone worker because there is somebody there who is directly supervising them. But the person who is with the lone worker, who's with the apprentice, is still a lone worker. And the reason that they say that is they think their definition of lone worker goes something like this. Anybody who works by themselves or without close or direct supervision from somebody who would understand the risks of the nature of the job, and know what to do in an emergency. So they've kind of expanded it out. And I thought that's quite a clever little definition. But if you look at what the HSE says, it splits it down then into these kind of specific areas. Main place of work, in the community, other people's homes, and in your own home. So it starts to kind of give us more feel for where people are working. What it doesn't tell us, though, is what people are doing in those environments. So, for example, in main place of work, you might have somebody who is a cleaner who comes in before everybody else comes in, or it could be somebody that comes in to get a report finished early or stays late to get a report finished. So you see you've got somebody cleaning, somebody doing office work. They're two very, very different tasks. Other areas of the building where nobody can hear or see you. Well, I used to teach, and for me that meant I'd be up on the 4th floor and there'd be nobody else on that floor, and everybody else would be down on the ground floor. So although there were people in the building, I was still a lone worker, but I'm teaching. But so is the receptionist, who is downstairs on the ground floor meeting people walking through the door. Again, can you see it's two different kind of activities, two different roles, but both kind of classed as lone workers. And then, of course, you've got people out in the community. This could be visiting other people's homes, or it could be the people that come out putting the tickets on our cars. There's lovely people. Or it could be people mending streetlights or gas mains or water. And it could be people who are travelling out and about as well. And I think Nigel might be talking about kind of the definition of when we would include sort of travelling as part of our lone working day, and when we would sort of think about the difference of that and just commuting, as it were. So we'll look at that a little bit later on. What we're also going to be kind of looking at later is kind of the risks to lone workers. And I just want to be really clear on this. Lone working itself is not the risk. And I think partly because of what I've just said, you should start to get the idea. Lone working is not the risk, because lone working isn't the task. You have to kind of identify what the job is, what the task is, the activity is that people are doing, to be able to work out what the risk is. And then just look at the idea of, well, they're on their own. Does that impact on the risk in any way? And I think lone working is not the risk, but it can increase the likelihood of an incident occurring, as it can increase the severity of an incident or the level of harm to somebody should an incident occur. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's kind of expand that a little bit more though. So we've got health and safety risks, we've got personal safety and security risks, and we've got mental health and well-being risks. And if we kind of look at those, they all do kind of interplay, because if I've got, say, for example, fear of violence and aggression, is that a personal safety and security risk, or is that a mental health and well-being risk? And I think the two kind of interact. If I've got an issue around fatigue, which Karen is going to talk about a little bit later on, you could argue that's a well-being issue, but it also is going to have an impact on health and safety, because that's perhaps when mistakes happen and when accidents occur. But it also could have an impact on my personal safety and security, because if there was an incident, I might not know quite what to do, in those circumstances, or be aware of the incident occurring in those circumstances. So it's kind of commonly accepted that if you look at health and safety, these are the kind of things that are impacted on by lone working. Not all of them are more likely, but I think all of those would be made more severe if I was on my own. So Nigel, can I just pull in your kind of experience on this bit for a second or two? Any kind of thoughts on this? We've got kind of health and safety, road traffic incidents when traveling long distance, especially late or early in the morning. Illness, medical emergencies. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute they're more likely to occur if I'm on my own, but certainly it's the impact of not having somebody there to be able to call for help and support for me. What's your kind of experience in these issues with lone workers? We can hear you, can't see you at the minute, Nigel.
Just a minute, a couple of things. And first of all, the law, of course, around driving is very complex. If you are commuting to your normal place of work, then the provisions of the Health and Safety at Work Act really apply. And as an organisation, strictly, you're not legally liable to do anything, but many organisations do. More interestingly, if you are driving anywhere else, literally anywhere else, and work is the guiding mind, you are driving on behalf of your organisation, then you do have a real requirement. And obviously, for most organisations, driving will be one of your largest risks. It has the highest impact, and it is the thing that most people do most of the time.
Yeah.
And so actually, whatever your driving policy is, you have to take account of the fact that a lot of drivers are lone workers. Very few, sadly, car share. Very few of them will be driving with somebody else. So strictly speaking, you have to have a view. And that means you need a proper defined policy covering everything from brakes to what to do in an emergency, what to do if you've got no phone signal. All of those things need to be contained in that. If you look at the other issues, I think a lot of people find themselves remote working where if they fall ill, particularly, I guess in these COVID times, if they fall ill, the company hasn't really thought out what to do about it. Indeed, a lot of companies don't even know where people are. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in my little session is going to be around the fact that companies are ignorant of where their lone workers lie, whereabouts they are, and really, really importantly, they don't take account of what work they're actually doing. And I think that's a really big challenge.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and that's exactly my point about, this, we shouldn't kind of really in a way define lone working. We should define the tasks that people are doing and then kind of just add in the lone working as one of those issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a conversation, interestingly, recently, Nigel, with a company we're working with, a utilities company, and we had a bit of I'm going to say a heated discussion, because it was around this idea whether they were responsible for their travelling, and they had people that were going in their vans from home to site. Absolutely. And I was saying, well, you need to look at that then as part of kind of your risk assessment and be responsible. Oh yeah, but they don't work then because they're not paid until they get to site.
Irrelevant.
And I said, I'm not interested in their employment contract. It's about the health and safety, it's not of them, isn't it? Yeah, so it doesn't matter what your employment contract says.
No, so the Health and Safety Work Act actually applies to people travelling to and from work. If it's not their standard, if you work in a building, then the Health and Safety Work Act, and it's only an anomaly of the way that the law was put together, the Health and Safety Work Act doesn't apply. If you're travelling to anywhere other than your normal place of work, which is a fixed place of work, the Health and Safety Work Act applies the moment you leave your property. So essentially, the notion that says you're a man in a van going to a remote site, it only applies when you arrive on site, it is factually incorrect. And if there is a failure of management as a result of you not thinking about the health and safety risks whilst that person is traveling to and from a peripatetic work, then you would be liable potentially for prosecution. Certainly, a civil claim is highly likely to be successful on the grounds of neglect.
So the way I normally try and kind of explain this to clients is the difference between commuting or travelling to site. So commuting kind of to and from your normal day work, that's your own business, what you
Absolutely
do.
Is,
but the rest of the time kind of is part and parcel of it.
There are some peculiar anomalies though. So if this was a real conference, if you were doing your wonderful thoughts, then actually the Health and Safety Work Act would apply to all of the wonderful delegates the moment they left their property. And again, it is an anomaly. I'm sure that the HSC, if Barbara is, should have a view, but I mean, I think you need to be careful. So things like people going on conferences, things like people going to meet clients. Oh, I'm just popping out for a meeting. You're a lone worker. So long as the guiding mind is your work. In other words, if the only reason you are going there is because you've been paid to do that, or you're a volunteer because actually the work tells you have to do it, then the Health and Safety Work Act applies.
Perfect, thank you. So look, let's move on then. So we've got kind of health and safety stuff, and there's other things in there: slips, trips, falls, manual handling, injuries. The biggest issue, as I've said, is around the idea that if I do have an accident, if I do have an incident, there isn't anybody that's going to be able to help me to get help and support. And the emergency services talk about that kind of the golden hour and getting help and support to you early. That could happen in somebody's building. If you are there late on a Friday evening and fall over and heaven forbid wallop your head on something, at what point would somebody find out? And we've had stories of cleaners being caught in lifts over whole weekends and being only kind of noticed by family members. Well, that kind of isn't a good enough control in my mind, that somebody at home is going to notice I'm missing is not something that I think businesses should ever rely on. Let's move on to kind of the mental health and well-being side of things. I think this is quite an interesting one. Work-related stress has been, obviously an issue for people for a long time. And I think over COVID, it certainly has grown. Fatigue, you could argue that, you know, linked to the driving, but also our boundaries have started to get blurred now with work. When we're working from home, at what point does my working day start? At what point does my working day finish? And I'm wondering of the people that we've got online this morning, how many of you, one of the first things you did this morning when you woke up was reach for your phone and checked your emails and checked your messages? And at that point you go, okay, so I'm kind of already working then. I'm already in that frame of mind where work is taking over, you know, that part of my brain that perhaps should be dealing with other things. And it does mean then that by the end of the day, there could be a level of fatigue that's setting in just generally. Well, that's on a Monday, that's on a Tuesday, but by the time it comes to a Friday, and of course, then if there is an issue where an emergency happens, I'm perhaps not as resilient as I could be. And that applies for kind of road traffic incidents. It could apply for illness, slips, trips and falls, but also it then kind of starts to add up to potentially impacting on my mental health as well. So we should be looking at mental health conditions. And whether somebody has one to start with, that then lone working could exacerbate that, or whether somebody, because of that work-related stress, is starting to struggle with their mental health. Either ways, that is part of our responsibility. You might notice in there that there's a contentious one in there, domestic violence. This has been a really interesting one for us over the last year, and we've had quite a few clients ask us this question, because now we've got people who were working at home kind of as, if you like, in an emergency situation. You know, we weren't expecting the pandemic, it was something that just happened. Therefore, you know, kind of all normal rules didn't apply and people just had to do this. But we've now got people who are potentially saying we're not all coming back to work. There was some research done by the BBC that said the vast majority of the 50 biggest companies in the UK are not having everybody back into the office after the pandemic. They are going to have much fewer people, and therefore a lot of people are going to be working from home. But what if that person lives in a hostile domestic environment? Am I then, as an employer, responsible for putting them at higher risk because of the nature of the work and the fact that now there isn't an office for them to come back to? Now, obviously, if you can have those open conversations with the people, and if there's a reason why somebody says, look, I need to come into the office and work, that is part of my kind of, if you like, control measure for managing my home life, then that's fine. But what if there are people who don't have that facility to come back into the workplace? Are we responsible? So I'm going to ask Barbara to talk about it in a minute or two. We've lost Barbara. Louise, can you just see if you can get hold of Barbara for me? That would be really helpful, because she should be back on with us in a minute or two. But I think it's an interesting one that businesses need to be aware of. And I think, forget the legal stuff, from a moral perspective, if I've got a member of staff that is at greater risk at home because I'm now not giving them a place of escape, that place of sanctuary, etc., which was an office or a workplace previously, then I think I need to support and help them through that process. Personal safety and security is kind of how I got into this 20 odd years ago, looking at kind of violence and aggression in the workplace and personal safety issues. That hasn't gone away. If anything, it's got much worse. And I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow at another conference talking about that. And I was looking at statistics in terms of how violence and aggression has increased over the level of pandemics and lockdown that we've had. And certainly, you know, things like in the NHS, the level of violence and aggression has gone up. There was an open statement went to the government yesterday from 6 key medical organisations looking at the level of abuse that medical professionals now getting because of waiting lists, which is kind of a byproduct of the pandemic and the lockdowns. So we know that violence and aggression has increased in those areas. I know from working with the railways that there were issues about encouraging people and then enforcing the idea of wearing face masks on public transport, etc., created violence and aggression and verbal abuse, intimidation, hate crimes in terms of racist comments and etc. You know, those kind of things are definitely going up. And we know we also in this country have an issue with what is now being labelled unwanted sexual behaviour. You might have called that sexual harassment, sexual intimidation, whatever kind of comes to your mind. But the official phrase now is unwanted sexual behaviour. And we know that that certainly is an area that, again, people in retail crimes, in retail areas, hospitality and the railways are looking at as something that is a priority for them to be looking at. Accusations is a bit of a weird one, because it's kind of not a risk to me personally in terms of my physical safety, but I think it can have an impact on my mental well-being if somebody's accusing me of something. And because there's nobody with me to kind of be my witness, that is more likely to occur if somebody is lone working. And that can be from, you know, well, I'm sure I had a purse with 50 quid on the side when you came in to mend my tap, and now the money's gone and I can't find the purse, and I'm sure, did you leave it? Through to perhaps flipping that unwanted sexual behaviour the other way, that a client or a customer accuses the member of staff of unwanted sexual behaviour. There are lots of things that we have to consider when we have lone workers out and about, and these are just some of the things that can affect people. And it was interesting because I was looking through these thinking, well, which of these then kind of impact on my clients the most? And for us, actually, it's the mental health stuff and the violence and aggression. But there is a report coming out tomorrow by an organisation called Stay Safe that have just done a piece of research. And actually for them, it was quite interesting because of the people that they asked, the kind of incidents that they'd be having. It wasn't actually violence and aggression stuff. It was more kind of slips, trips and falls and unwell medical emergencies kind of stuff that came out as higher. But I'll leave you to kind of find that on the web and have a look at that for yourselves. But it's just interesting to look at this, the kind of risk that people come against. Risk to the organisation. Look, there's loads. I've kind of put these on there, and you can argue with me as to whether you think some of these should be bigger, but you know, whether some of them are more important. There's obviously the financial impact, there's obviously the reputational damage, there's also issues around civil claims that Nigel has already mentioned. But then I think we've also got stuff which is harder to kind of measure. That kind of absenteeism, the service levels that drop because my staff don't feel confident, and when they're not feeling confident in their workplace or safe in their workplace, that has an impact on how they engage with our customers. So staff engagement is poor. And that means managers are focusing on, why are we losing staff engagement? Why are we losing service levels? So that means they're spending more time dealing with those kind of things than they are on building a business. So that has an impact. Loss of trust from our customers, loss of trust from our staff. You could even argue things like our creativity gets dampened because people don't want to engage in the business in the same way. They don't feel the same way about the business that they work for. So I think it's really interesting to look at the risks, and I'm sure that you probably can come up with quite a few more than the ones that I've put there. But look, all I wanted to do is just to give you a quick kind of broad overview of why we're doing this morning, what kind of lone working means, what some of the risks are that people face, and why you should be here and listen to us the rest of the morning. So I'm going to hand over to Barbara Hockey in a second or two, but just to give Barbara a second or two, I know she had a few internet issues this morning. I'm just going to play you, as an introduction to Barbara, a video that has just been released by the HSE. So hopefully you should be able to see this. It's just a couple of minutes. Let's see if we can get this to play. And of course it's not going to play, is it? No, it's not going to play. So hopefully, Barbara, are you there? Are you with us this morning? I do love it when things go to plan.
Morning.
Barbara, you are there.
I've just had typically lone working at home, having a complete meltdown, but I'm here. So.
It's typical, isn't it? And you know what? This is the kind of thing that we were saying, that the challenges of lone working, when you've got nobody else stood next to you, or an IT man at the end of a phone that you can go, come and give us a hand.
I've got my son who's been getting roared at to try and help me in hotspots and things like that. But anyway, it's
fantastic.
Never mind. The trials of just bear with me a second while I get my notes up.
That's okay. So Barbara, you should have control of the screen at this moment. You'll be able to move through the slides on your own. And what we'll do is we'll pose any questions to you at the end of your session, if that's okay, Barbara.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Okay. So first of all, Good morning. I'm going to calm down now and this will all be fine. So some of you will already have heard me speak a few times at these lone worker conferences, and I'm delighted that Nicole asked me to come and do this again, because I think it's really, really timely. And who knew a couple of years ago how much lone working would come into the fore, and to have the personal experience of it as well is even more, see it from a different angle. So I just need to close something down while I'm doing this, because this is going to annoy all of you hearing my computer. Don't
worry. Is everybody emailing you first thing this morning?
I think there's a delay of things having come through. So right, let me crack on. So for those who don't know me, though, I'm head of a policy unit within HSC, which is grandly termed vulnerable workers. And really what it mainly covers is those groups of workers who are covered under the Equality Act with the protected characteristics. So you can imagine there's all sorts of different health and safety issues that apply to them. However, it also extends to lone workers, and a subset of that is home workers. And so today what I wanted to do was to tell you about the work that we've done to support the lone workers, where we are with that, and then also how we've moved that on and how we're having to provide guidance or further guidance for for home workers. So I think, do you say I've got control of the mouse?
You should have control of the mouse there, Barbara. You should be able to click on the slide and then just go forward. If not, I can help you out if you're struggling.
It doesn't seem to be.
There you go.
It's that delay.
Give me a shout if it's not working.
I'm just trying to move it on. Just trying to give it a delay. That's it. So instead of pause for a breath to press the mouse. Okay, so the lone worker guidance, we published this in March 2020, just before lockdown. And this has proved to be one of the most effective pieces of guidance that we've had for some of the people during the pandemic. And it does seem a long time ago, and yet really, I'm sure we've all experienced it's just gone so quickly as well. But we've noticed with this guidance, we've kept a track on it, and it's remained consistently one of our top 10 pieces of guidance, either the internet guidance available, but even within the first few months, there were able to feedback on it. I mean, it is quite generic, and it does, because it cuts across all sectors. So it's so I can understand there's some viewpoints that some sectors would like a little bit more detailed on that. So maybe if it was the transport sector, or couriers, or maybe people working in healthcare, where there'll be particular issues to that sector. So that's probably our next step, to look at like how we might be able to support that a little bit more through those sectors, rather than through this generic guidance, but working with industry stakeholders. But I think, it's fair to say, having the input of actually working with those who cover lone working across all the sectors helped us create this guidance. So it's a big thank you to the stakeholders who were involved with it, and also listening directly to people at the conferences from some of those first-hand experiences. And I think that's really helped shape that. So I know that we did trial and tell you that we were having this new lone workers video, and it should have been uploaded last year, but just various pressures. I think you'll all appreciate the amount of guidance and material that HSC's had to produce with the limited resources available. And also, we've also responsible for the building safety regulator, and that's ramped up that side of the work for HSC. So ultimately, I've managed to secure finally to get this video completed. And it was published last week, so it's up on the YouTube website, part of HSC's YouTube channel. And Nicole, I know you tried to show that earlier. Appreciate it. It's difficult, and it was beyond my technical skills to be able to do this today. But I thought worth showing it, promoting it, and showing you that it is there. And it's only 2.5 minutes, so great if anyone wants to get a cup of coffee later, maybe, and try and find that. Okay, so I'll just move on to. So, what do we know about what things are starting to look like and the future of work? And this is just like a snapshot from an ONS business insights and impact into the UK economy, which was published only a couple of weeks ago at the end of September. But it highlights, I'm not expecting everybody to read this in any detail, but what it does do is it shows, where the vacancies are and how many of them are related to home working. So from everybody having to work from home wherever possible, and that being a government push for us all to do that, what we're now seeing is the rise in the number of people who are going to be home working. And that's obviously a really significant challenge for those employers who've never had that before. And I think the lone worker guidance and the support that those companies that provide for the training and the skill set that you needed, and for the managers to manage people who are working at home on their own, is going to be really important. And that what we've noticed is people say, well, what are my health and safety responsibilities? What do I need to do as an employer? I've always had somebody who's done a little bit of home working before. I've never had a permanent home worker contract, and we've got into this territory of high.
Struggling a little bit with your internet, Barbara, but hopefully you'll come back to us in a moment or two. Typical technical issues this morning, first thing. Are you able to come back with us, Barbara? Not sure if people can hear. I think we may have lost Barbara there for a second or two. Okay, that's a shame. Hopefully we'll get Barbara back with us in a minute or two. No, doesn't look like we're going to be able to get Barbara back for a second. Let's see if we can do this. Nigel, what I might do is come to you in a second or two and see.
No problem at all.
Perhaps if we can go through this. I've got the rest of Barbara's slides here, but unfortunately I can't get that video to play either, because that would have been really helpful, wouldn't it? But it seems to be just that technology is against us this morning, folks. Nice to see a couple of questions coming in, and we will pose those to Barbara when she comes back. So thank you for that. Might be just an opportunity, if you think about, if you've got any questions about lone working this morning, this would be an opportunity to think about those. I am actually just about to be able to play the HSE's video for you. So here you go. This will just keep us going for a minute or two, and hopefully we'll get Barbara back.
As an employer, you must manage health and safety risks before people can work alone. This applies to anyone contracted to work for you, including self-employed people. Risks are greater for lone workers without other people to help if something goes wrong. Lone workers include delivery drivers, health workers, security and cleaning staff, farmers, shop workers, and people working at home. You must train lone workers to identify hazards and control the risks. This will help them cope in unusual situations and know when to ask for help. Provide supervision in any higher risk situations you have identified in your workplace risk assessment. If an employee is at someone else's workplace, you must ask that employer about any control measures to make sure they are protected if working alone. Monitor your lone workers and keep in touch with them. Make sure they understand any monitoring system and procedures or devices you use. Put emergency procedures in place and make sure lone workers know how to use them. For example, having first aid equipment and how to use it on themselves, and raising an alarm in emergencies. New lone workers should also be supervised if they are being trained, doing a job with specific risks, dealing with new situations. Make sure you support home workers. You have the same health and safety responsibilities for them and the same liability for accident or injury as for any other workers. Lone working does not always mean a higher risk of violence, but it does make workers more vulnerable. Put measures in place to support any worker who's experienced violence. Workers can play their part by identifying and reporting incidents. Training in personal safety or violence prevention will help them recognise situations where they feel at risk and use conflict resolution techniques or leave the workplace. Lone working can cause stress and affect mental health. Put procedures in place to monitor lone workers so managers can quickly recognise signs of stress. If contact is poor, lone workers may feel disconnected isolated or abandoned. Remember to train, supervise and monitor lone workers. Keep in touch and respond to any incident. By following these simple steps, you can protect those working alone.
Excellent. Well, that gave us a filler for a couple of minutes there, but also hopefully quite a useful little roundup of the HSE's kind of approach to this. Let's see if we can get Barbara back on the line now. Barbara, are you with us?
I am, hopefully.
Fabulous. Let me just see if I can pull back to where you were on your slides there. Do you know what? This is why I like doing things in the room, because if you just suddenly up and left the room, if we were face to face, it would be really weird, wouldn't it? And it just would never happen. But here, who knows what's going to happen next? So Barbara, are you happy just to carry on from where you were? I think this was the slide that you were on. Fabulous. Thank you. I can move the slides on for you, Barbara. It'd probably be easier.
Could you? So I think I was at slide 5.
There you go. Is that the one?
It's not showing for me just yet.
Okey-doke.
But that's okay, because I can talk through it. So I think what we should be seeing, I think it's definitely my connection at this end, is a picture.
No, Barbara, we are losing you, I'm afraid. Okay, I think, folks, what we're going to do, because we are losing Barbara again, is go straight on to Nigel. We'll try and get Barbara into a more stable situation to be able to talk to us again, I think, because we're just not going to be able to get her, and I don't want people to kind of be left hanging in the lurch, if that's okay. So Nigel, I know that you're going to always be up for this, but jumping straight into the breach, would you mind starting your session for us now?
Of course I wouldn't mind.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Poor old Barbara, poor old you. Yeah. What am I talking about? No, managing risk. Yeah. Okay. So
some of you may not know Nigel, but Nigel and I go back for quite a few years. We've worked together for quite a long time. Nigel's the director of human applications, so a risk management company. And I know Nigel has a lot of experience in kind of health and safety, worked in lone working areas, and also acted as expert witness in lone working cases. So this is the man to pick the brains of. If you've got questions, please start putting them forward on the Q&A box now. But I'll hand over to Nigel. Nigel, I'm probably going to interrupt you with questions as we go through. That's okay.
Of course you are. What else would I expect?
Perfect.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I now have control. I think no, I've got. Oh, I'm just viewing it at the moment, Nicole. I'm sure you're going to give me control in a second.
Give you control. That sounds.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, excellent. What could possibly go wrong? Right. So I've jumped way. I must have been pressing away here too often.
I think you did.
Oh, okay.
Let me help you out. I'll get you.
It's all right. It's all right. I'll be patient. I will be patient.
Not patient enough, obviously.
There.
There you go.
Right, folks. So to start at the beginning, as Nicole said, my name is Nigel Heaton. I work for Human Applications. We do lots of work with organisations who struggle with health and safety matters. I also act as what's called an expert witness for defendants in criminal cases, for both defendants and claimants in civil cases. I'm not a lawyer. I am an expert in systems of health and safety and how health and safety systems are implemented. And it's worth saying right at the beginning, there's a huge myth around what risk management is. Suffice to say, although organizations don't actually legally have to do risk assessments, they have to do something called an assessment of risk and record significant findings. And most organizations, that means that they end up with documents called risk assessments. And it is worth saying that both criminally and civilly, there is a massive emphasis on documentation. So love it or hate it, you've got to get good at it. It's also worth saying up front that actually most accountabilities for health and safety lie in management, in the management structure, with line managers, ultimately with the chief exec or equivalent. There are some accountabilities for employees, But it's a myth. If anybody ever says everybody's accountable for health and safety, that is both factually wrong and not very helpful. So essentially, what do you need to know? If you are a manager, you need to know what your teams do. And I think that's a huge challenge, because a lot of organizations have people called lone workers. And the minute you're lone working, there's a phenomenon. We call it the Sunday rule book. It's what do you do when nobody's in the room? How do you know how your colleagues behave? How do they know what they do? And an observation here, if there is a safe way to do something and an easy way to do something, inevitably colleagues do it the easy way. And sometimes if the easy way and the safe way don't coincide, they take risks which basically you are accountable for. It's also, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but there is an idea that you as a manager are also accountable for what your colleagues do to other people. That's called vicarious liability. And we have seen some fairly peculiar court judgments about that. For example, an employee of Morrison's at a petrol filling station working by himself assaulted a customer, and Morrison's were deemed to be 50% responsible for that assault. So it is worth remembering that you also have to think about what your colleagues do to other people. But it's all about managing risk, and genuinely, in risk management terms, context is king. Actually, there is no risk, for example, of a ladder. There is no risk of an object. There's no risk even of doing anything until you know what people are actually doing. And understanding what people actually do allows you to understand what is meant by risk. So if you have somebody who visits somebody at home, that gives you a context. And within that home visit, there's a story about driving to the home. There's a story about going onto the property. There's a story about going into the house. Then there's a story about that in reverse. And basically what we see is somebody doing a task that you pay them for, or indeed if they're a volunteer, a task that you expect them to do as a volunteer. And essentially, it is really important that you have a model for knowing what your teams do. I'm sadly involved in a small number of fatalities, and it's fair to say that sometimes these fatalities, people turn around and say, we didn't know this person did this job. I'm working with a large government organization now where they had somebody who was out working, doing a job which involved using heavy equipment and cutting down trees. And there was a potential that this job wasn't as well understood as the organization would have liked it to have been. So it's really important as an organization that you have a model for defining what tasks your people do, and then deciding whether or not you care. Because I go and visit organizations after bad things have happened, or when I'm training in organizations trying to explain how to do this better, I start by saying the single most important thing that you as a manager need to do is to show your staff that you care. Give me a way in which I can measure how you care. And I think the easiest way to do that is to have what we call a task list. I'll come back onto that in a couple of minutes, but also to have a model that allows you to decide how much you care. And the model that we employ is called the XYZ model. And it says this: for any activity, any task that your colleagues do, you can see what you're worried about. You can see that there might be an adverse event that prevents those people from doing that task. And that adverse event, we sometimes call it an accident or an incident. In other words, if we come back to the simple example of using a ladder, if you're using a ladder to clean windows, the adverse event that you're worried about is somebody falling off a ladder. If you are visiting somebody's home, the adverse event might be somebody having a road traffic accident, a road traffic collision on their way to the home, or it might be being assaulted by the person that you're visiting. I did it. I'm not touching it now. Why is it going forward? Is that you? Is that me?
Don't know.
Okay.
Who
right.
knows?
Who knows? Right, just a minute. Just a minute. Let me unplug that because I don't like that still. Okay. So look, so we have a situation where we can model risk, and it's telling a gory story. It says this: if I have a person who visits somebody else's home, they're working for me. I can predict that there is a plausible chance of them being assaulted, to have got an aggressive homeowner, and that can result in serious injury. And if I can predict it, I can manage it. So what we do is we have a very simple predictive model that says if I know what my people are doing, I can take any job. I can take any job I like, and I can basically look to the future. And I can say, folks, if I know that somebody is doing this job, this is what I'm worried about. This is why it will happen. This is how bad it will be. And essentially, all of us will probably know that risk is made up of this thing called likelihood and this thing called severity or hazard, consequence, or impact. And we know two things about lone workers. Firstly, if you are a lone worker, you're more likely to suffer harm. And you're more likely to suffer harm just because you are alone. People's behaviors change, your own behavior changes, because I've said it about the Sunday rulebook. You do things differently. But also, the harm is more likely to be worse. It's more severe just because you're alone. If you fall down with a colleague and break a leg, then the colleague, hopefully if they're a reasonable human being, phones the ambulance and gets you to hospital. You are covered. If you're by yourself and you can't move and you haven't got a mobile phone, you could be dead. So we know that we've got two big issues with lone working, which is it's more problematic because harm is more likely to occur. And when harm occurs, it is going to be potentially more severe. So as an organization, we have to think about what do we need to do? And I'm hoping, have I just clicked twice there, or is it? What you need to do is to create something called a task list. And a task list is really simple. It just says, what the hell do people do? And for every task that somebody does, for every task, you need to decide, is there a plausible accident? Is there something that can happen to people? And essentially, if there is, how bad would it be? Now, people ask me, I train lots of organizations in the creation of task list. How much detail, what grain of detail do you need to do? And I would say, take the Goldilocks approach. Too much detail and you'll end up with too many tasks. Too little detail, meaningless to evaluate. You want to be about in the just right. Now, they're too hot nor too cold, right in the middle. And it seems to me that actually what you really want to know is, what do people do where we might need to know more, that we might need to evaluate? So a task list is a really good way of getting rid of the dross, figuring out where are my big ticket risks. And I will tell you now, if you have lone workers, they will be a big ticket risk. No matter what you think you're doing about controlling it, about mitigating it, no matter what your approach is, as long as you have lone workers within the organization, you have significant risk. So you need to get good descriptions of the activities that lone workers do, and you need to get good descriptions of what you're worried about. And it's fair to say the better you can describe a risk, the more likely you are to manage it. The more likely you are to manage it effectively, the more likely you are to put in effective mitigations. And I think that is really important, because a lot of organizations have kind of these so-called generic risk assessments, which, to be honest, are just an apple pie. Here is a top tip from me. When I train organizations, when I work with organizations, when they show me their risk assessments, my challenge will be, so how does this bit of paper affect behavior on the ground? How does it actually change the behavior of your colleagues? How does it change the behavior of your managers? Because actually, if you can describe a risk really well, what you are doing is you are planning to kill, to maim, to seriously hurt your colleagues. You're planning exactly how you're going to do that. How am I going to kill, maim, and seriously hurt my colleagues? And once you understand that, once you understand how to kill, maim, and seriously hurt your colleagues, hopefully you put in place mitigations, controls. Go on.
Nigel, just had a question come in actually from Joe, who says, you just said, if you have lone workers, you will have significant risk. Our only lone workers are working from home. Would you still class that as a significant risk?
Too right. I mean, you've already indicated all the domestic violence issues. We've got issues of stress. We've got issues of things like the big problem with a lot of home workers, even if you're in a really benign environment, is things like handling and displaced equipment risks. That they have three really significant characteristics. First of all, the cumulative. In other words, they aren't something that you spot straight away. Secondly, they're non-acute. In other words, it's not the result of a sudden accident. It's the fact that it is this kind of like slow build-up. And thirdly, they're insidious, as in they are hidden. You know, if you look at somebody's back, you know, you can't see very much. They might have a significant injury that they sustained over time. So 100%, if you're a lone worker at home, do you know what? Yeah, you have to be managed. I mean, as you saw from the HSE's little little video, home workers are absolutely subject to the law and will be the subject of significant risk. How do we know that? We actually can prove that they are the subject of significant risk because we have these things called the manual handling operations regulations and the health and safety open brackets display screen equipment regulations. There's a close bracket in there as well. And the reason those regulations exist is because the HSE has acknowledged that there is a significant risk associated with both using a computer and lifting shifting. You could go further and say that things like the portable appliance testing regimes indicate that there might be a risk associated with any electrical equipment. If that electrical equipment is supplied by work and is used at home, then again you have that risk. So 100% you've got significant risks.
I think it's just really important to underline that, because a lot of people will think about, you know, things like the violence and aggression and actually, like you said, it's incidents occurring, where this is more a situation that develops over time, isn't it? And so that can become more problematic. Yeah, thank you for that. Just wanted to reiterate that point. Thank you.
Nicole, I've no idea what time I started at and what time I'm finishing at.
Don't worry, if you aim to finish about 22, Nigel, sorry, 10 to, that'd be perfect.
Fantastic. Sorry about that, folks. It's almost like I'm a professional. Don't you believe it?
Almost.
Almost. Very, very. So here is the gag. If you can understand what people do and you can tell stories of risks being realized, then you are more likely to be able to control the risks and either make the risks go away or make risks less severe or make the risks less likely. Now, there is something called a legal hierarchy of controls. It's a schedule which is contained in the management regulations, but basically it says this: if you're a manager, the first question that you have to ask yourself is, why the heck are we doing this? If you can describe a significant risk, if you've got a way of killing your colleagues, you can describe that, then why the heck would you do that? And the most organizations, when they look at that, there is a really good reason. It's because it's what we do. If you are a social service, if you provide people who go and visit home workers to do PIP assessments, if you are a profession allied to medicine and go and do home visits to treat people who have mobility problems, actually what you do is defined. And the Health and Safety at Work Act presupposes work. Therefore, it presupposes that organizations take risk. And you know, that's cool. We are not living in a risk-free world. We don't want to. My goodness, how horrible that would be. However, sometimes organizations do stupid stuff because nobody's asked the question, do we really have to do this? I did a case, it was actually in the Republic of Ireland, where and I'm going to use this pejorative term advisedly, a very stupid manager made one of his staff go into somebody's home, despite the fact that this woman who was at home, had a history of violence towards officials, and he did not want her in the office in case she kicked off. She went into the home, she was seriously assaulted, and again, that was an unnecessary job. So the first question is, do we have to do it? Can we do it in a smarter way? Can we do it in a way that eliminates lone working? Can we do it in a way that eliminates the job altogether? If we can't, can we make it inherently safer? The problem with lone working is it doesn't lend itself well to non-behavioral controls. It's really hard to make lone working inherently safer if the risk is lone working. So there are challenges. Some organizations think about the ways in which you can make things inherently safer. So for example, if part of your job is to go and visit people, whether you can physically separate yourself from them, not easy. And if you have to do lone working and you can't do either of the first two, then we basically rely upon behaviors. We have to make sure people are competent. We have to make sure they're trained. And there is a real issue here. Sometimes we have incredibly good controls which are hidden. By that, I mean, the reason it's not kicking off is because the person doing the job is incredibly competent, they're incredibly skilled. They go off sick and the newbie takes over and it all kicks off. So we need to be very clear that actually we are relying upon behavioral controls around people controls that is described in such a way as we can replicate it, so that when the person goes, when they retire, when they resign, when they are off sick or on holiday, we have a solution. And then it says it all ends with PPE. And I think that is really important. It ends with PPE. And it is very rare that we would say personal protective equipment is an effective control. It's something that you put in place when everything else has gone wrong, because personal protective characteristics, first of all, it doesn't make the incident less likely, and sometimes it doesn't mitigate the effects of the incident. It's just a way of telling people what's going on, or of you going, oh, well, up there, but for the grace of God. And you'll see, separate from all of that, is this idea that counselling and all the EA employee assistance program, all that other postdoc stuff, is not a control. It's a nice to have, but it does absolutely nothing to manage the risk. And I think to be very careful, if you say to somebody, oh, our control systems are fantastic, we've got the best EAP you've ever seen, you're kind of missing the point. So moving on, I'm hoping. Have I pressed it or have I not pressed it? The joy. Oh, there we go. So what does the law expect of you? First of all, if you're a manager, the law expects that you're going to ensure the health, safety and welfare of your staff. You're going to ensure the health and safety of everybody affected by your undertaking. Everybody affected by your undertaking. In other words, when you go and see somebody, you're looking at protecting them as much as you are protecting the individual. And I think it's something the police have yet to learn. But that idea that says, if you're a lone worker, you're not just interested in how you as a lone worker are protected, you're interested in what effect your lone worker has on other people. As a manager, you are required to have a risk assessment or equivalent. Absolutely. You are required to have something. And sadly, that means a documentation, something that I can prove. Could be kept on a computer, but it has to be something I can audit. If you can't audit it, if you can't prove that it exists, the law is very clear, it doesn't. So if you haven't got something that looks as though you've done a risk assessment, if you go, well, we did it, dynamic risk assessment, it was all internal, then the courts have a very strong view on that, which is it never happened. If you are a manager and you're desperate to go to prison, you can do that. If you are negligent, if you connive, if you basically create a situation where a consent to a situation where people get harmed, there's something called Section 37 of the Health and Safety Work Act. It allows the HSE CPS to bring a prosecution against you as an individual, and it used to be incredibly rare. It's fair to say the HSE seems to have got more of an appetite for prosecuting managers. We're still in a very rare situation. We're still seeing very few prosecutions, but whereas if we go back sort of 10, 15 years, we're talking about one or two, we're now talking about upwards of 20 to 40 per year. And certainly something called the sentencing guidelines, when they were reformed and reviewed, that seems to encourage the HSE and CPS to bring more prosecutions. It's also fair to say that as an organization, there is a huge emphasis on justifying what you've not done. And something called Section 40 of the Health and Safety Work Act says it's not up to the HSE to prove that you could have done something. It's up to you to prove that you couldn't. And that basically means that you have to have a view as to why the hell are we doing this job? Why didn't we do it with two people? Why did we allow this to happen? And then finally, we've got this notion of reasonable practicability and so far as is reasonably practicable, which basically says, as an organization, you've got to think, how far do we go? And unfortunately, the larger your organization, the bigger the challenge. If you're a small company, spending a few £1,000 on a risk control might be pretty scary. If you're a large organization, spending a few £1 million on risk control might be expected. So you need to know how far you're going to go, and you need to do the thing of balancing the risk against the cost. And if we move on from that, if that's kind of what the law expects, what does it look like? It says if you're a local authority and you send somebody to somebody else's home. So first of all, let's describe the task better so we can understand whether or not we can foresee something kicking off. Now, my partner is she works for the Citizens Advice. She's a Citizen Advice volunteer. She does stuff similar to this, which basically is figure out whether somebody's eligible for funding or not. Now, from a CAB perspective, you're always a good guy. If you're a council worker going into somebody's home, part of your job might be to determine that somebody's not eligible for funding. The minute you have that, what we can see is it looks as though this could be a risk that is worth managing. So the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, if we can describe the task in detail, we can see some kind of worrying things about this task. Lone working, giving bad news, potentially visiting somebody in an environment where they might behave in a way that is not normal. If they were in a council office and you were in an open plan office and you were talking to them, they might not behave the same way. If you're in a home, they might behave differently. Also, remember that when you're in a home, you've got access to loads of really exciting things like knives, bottles, who knows what else. And so that looks as though it's a risk that might be worth managing. If we move on, say, okay, the second question that we have to think about is let's try and talk about a scenario that is plausible, and plausibility matters. You're going to see the phrase kidnapped by aliens. It says this: there is a risk that the lone worker might be assaulted because basically you've got an aggressive homeowner who's just been told, I'm not going to get benefit, and that can result in long-term absence, long-term injury. Now, you have to check plausibility. Do not catastrophize everything. Do not think about things that actually are completely fantastical. So the challenge that you would have to address it, and this is really the point at which you can test this. If you can imagine you're going to a court, either a civil or a criminal court, and you go, well, this has never happened before, my lord, or I was really surprised, my lord. If you can add that kind of legal context, could you say to a magistrate, could you say to a judge, could you say to a coroner, this sort of thing has never happened before? And if the answer is, well, you're an idiot, it's rather like I think it's 1898, the coroner of the First Lady who was killed in a motor traffic accident sincerely hoped that nobody else would be killed again. It didn't quite work out that way. And you couldn't go to court and say, my goodness, somebody's in a road traffic accident, got hit by a car and they died. Oh my God, I'm surprised. So you have to check that is plausible. Does it look like the sort of thing that happens? And I always apply the kidnapped by aliens test. It says, does this look like something that is a kidnapped by aliens? In other words, we can predict it. I mean, Stephen King makes a living, and so do many other science fiction writers, about kidnapped by aliens scenarios. You know, is this a Guardian of the Galaxy moment where somebody has been kidnapped, or is it actually something that just looks incredibly plausible? If it passes that plausibility test, if you can write down something, then we need to say, what the heck does a risk assessment look like? And coming back to that Goldilocks challenge, we need to make sure that the task is not too detailed. I don't want a separate risk assessment every time somebody goes to visit home working. Somebody goes to visit somebody at home. However, I would like a specific risk assessment which basically outlines what I'm worried about associated with home working, and then that everybody covered by that risk assessment, where there are actions around training and competencies, we can prove that they've all met that requirement. So it's basically lots of information about people, about why you're going to homes, people in their homes, what sort of people they are, what's happened in the past, what sort of near misses have you had, what sort of controls are you thinking about? And again, where you've got an explanation of harm, where you're saying what we're worried about is, for example, physical injury, then you need to be able to say, based on what? Why is it not death? Why is it not some sort of sexual incident? Why is it not something that is just verbal abuse? Why have you pitched it here? And is it because that is the worst case that's reasonably foreseeable? And you have to be able to justify your answers. Don't think that you can kind of go, oh yeah, it's just there. You have to be prepared. This is not rocket science, but it's not best guess. It's not back of a fact packet. You're expected to sweat a bit to create a risk assessment. You're not expected to spend 2 minutes on this. And if we go beyond that, we now have created the risk assessment. Then the third question, final question, is the so what of it. What are we going to do about it? And it's going through, can we stop them? Can we go with a buddy? Can we improve the intelligence about the person we're visiting? Can we train our team better? Can we change the nature of the task? In other words, you know, Nicole worked for an organization a few years ago where basically just told people they got really good pensions. Even giving that good news still resulted in a really, really scary incident. And so we need to look about what's going on and make sure that all comes together. And that taking action is genuinely important, because if you can describe the risk, if you can figure out the so what of it, you're more likely to come up with effective solutions. And look, folks, if it does go wrong, then expect bad things to happen. I think my experience is the HSE have got views on bad things happening, and they are inclined to prosecute if you're not managing your risk proportionately, if you don't have good risk assessments, if you haven't thought through what controls, if you haven't thought about how people can be harmed. And also, it does say the potential for very high fines. One of the things that we used to struggle with was finding examples of fines bigger than £1 million. They're now very easy. And one of the impacts of the sentencing guidelines, the reforms, has been the court's willingness to impose really substantial fines. And in the past, when we, you know, normally if you kill somebody, in the past it would be like a 20 grand slap on the wrist, you know, oh, you've killed somebody, don't do that again, have a £20,000 fine. Now the courts are much more likely to say have a £2 million fine, and actually we'll look to prosecute the individuals who are accountable for this, and you might do time, you might be sent to Choky, or at least get suspended prison sentence. So for goodness sake, you know, there is a lot of evidence to say you have to do stuff to improve the way in which you do it.
Nigel, just before you go on to your final thoughts, we've got one of our attendees has asked the question, you're talking about prosecutions, etc. Are there any examples of lone worker prosecutions that you can talk about, specific examples that are kind of out there?
Okay, I can give you from a criminal perspective, one in which there was no prosecution because the organisation was just magnificent. Basically, yeah, it was occurred at a company. It's a matter of public record. A company called Thornton and Ross. They had a guy who was subject to a horrific attack. Sadly, he lost his life, and I was asked to look at the case. And basically, because they were such a great organization, I mean truly great organization, they had evidence, they've got risk assessments, they've got training, they put some fabulous controls. And basically what happened was the guy went into a car park, he was viciously assaulted by 2 teenagers and he lost his life. But actually they had things like recording, the teenagers had been identified, they were being recorded, there were lights, the guy had been trained, he was trained in diffusion, they actually videoed the whole thing. The poor old health and safety manager, she had to watch the bloody thing, which is terrible. But what we saw was actually the organization was not prosecuted, the individuals were not prosecuted because they really looked as though they cared, that it put into action all of the things that they'd identified and they'd enacted it, spent a lot of money on managing it. So that was a good one. The one the Republic of Ireland one was one where actually it was a civil case, and the case was settled on the courts of the Supreme Court just before they went to final litigation. There are numerous examples of where organizations, typically it tends to be civil claims for loan working, but there are a lot. I mean, I tend to work on ones where essentially I will be representing the claimant, and what happens is that the claimant will have been injured or suffer not just physical injury, also things like post-traumatic stress. So for example, I worked for a bookmakers, and I worked for a claimant who was suing a bookmaker, and basically she was in Scotland. She went to work to open up the office, and somebody grabbed her from behind and put what she thought was actually a sharp screwdriver to her throat, and said, "If you don't give me the contents of your safe, this is going to go into your neck." And the organization in question had no risk assessments. They had what's called a generic risk assessment, which was totally meaningless. They also said, oh, well, a bookmakers in Glasgow is exactly the same as a bookmakers, for example, in Loughborough. And at the time, Glasgow was famously the murder capital of Europe, but they were very pleased. When I was doing the research, I thought, there's a great article from Glasgow to say that they were safer than they had been. So instead of there being 10 times as unsafe as any other city in Europe, they're only twice as unsafe as any other city in Europe, which was a great cause for celebration. So what you saw there was the exact opposite of Thornton and Ross, where was an organization that had no proper risk assessments, no controls, no recognition how scary it was that this particular this particular location was at excessive risk, because it was in a horrific area of Glasgow. And he said what happened was the lady was given a very, very substantial award for the trauma of what had happened. And it forced the organization to fundamentally review how it managed risk, and they've subsequently invested literally tens of millions of pounds in making them safer.
I think there's also quite a lot to be learnt from cases where they actually don't end up in court as well, though, aren't there? I think, as you just said. Thank you to Tony Gray. He's just put on here, and I know the case he's talking about. There is a current prosecution by the HSE in Scotland. You can find that on the HSE website. Details are a little bit too sensitive to talk about here, but definitely you can kind of have a look at that one up on the website. So thank you for that. Just a couple of other questions are coming in just before kind of your final thoughts then, Nigel. Somebody has posted a question in slide 9. So back to your legal requirements, you said risk assessments or equivalent. So what would you class as equivalent to a risk assessment?
Really, really interesting question. I mean, basically, anything that looks as though it's managing risks. So it might be a standard operating procedure, safe system of work, it might even be training. It might even be a training regime that you can show. Actually, do you know what? We've looked at the risk, and what we've done as a result of that is created a training program or a standard operating procedure or a work permit or whatever it is. So don't get hung up on risk assessments. However, it's fair to say that if the HSE come knocking, they typically like to see a document called a risk assessment. And if you're not enforced by the HSE, if it's your EHO, if you don't have something that says risk assessment, they might think you don't know what you're doing. And there is kind of that emphasis on that.
And Mark Taylor has added quite a few questions actually, but I'm going to pick up a little bit of his question on here because it links to this. The role of dynamic risk assessments. Now, I know both you and I have got views on this, but just kind of your thought on the view of the role of dynamic risk assessments.
So I don't think they exist. I don't think you should rely upon them. I think what you're really talking about is dynamic decision making. So here's the thing. I work for a police force, and they said, here's why we rely on dynamic assessments, because when we open the cell in the morning where we've detained a prisoner overnight, we've literally no idea what we'll find. And I went, well, that's rubbish. Of course you know. What do you mean? Well, either you're going to find a prisoner or not. Either they're going to be dead or alive. If they are alive, either they're going to be aggressive or they're not. Actually, you know exactly what you're going to find. What you're saying
there ain't no tigers.
No, exactly. What you're saying is if you open a door to a prisoner, and either they're trying to kill themselves and they are almost dead, or they're trying to assault you, and straight away you know exactly what you're going to find. So dynamic risk assessment are quite often seen as a huge excuse not to do stuff. I think it's perfectly legitimate to say you require your staff to make dynamic decisions about risk, but to do that you empower them, you give them the training, you give them the knowledge, and genuinely, if you say dynamic risk assessments to deal with the unexpected, I ask you what the unexpected is, you tell me what the unexpected is, it's no longer unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely kind of moving towards the dynamic decision-making process, because I think it kind of gets away from the idea that the dynamic risk assessment replaces another risk assessment. And I think that's kind of the worry, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. You know, if you're going to say to people, we need you to make dynamic decisions, then you need to make sure that they have the skills to be able to do that, that they understand the risks, that they feel empowered to follow whatever their brain is then telling them at that particular point. Mark, you had a couple of other interesting points, and both Nigel and I will get back to you after that on that, because I think we've both got views on those, but I think they're probably a more specific question than we've got time for at the moment. So thank you for that. So Nigel, I'm going to let you finish up, because we're going to go back to Barbara just to quickly finish her session and try and get back on time.
Right, folks, look, three things that I think really matter to any organization. And say, when I work with organizations, they kind of say, doing the training, doing the consultancy stuff, what are my key messages? The first is, as I said at the beginning, be seen to care. And I think that is incredibly important. If you pay lip service to health and safety, your staff will know that. If you care, your staff will know that. And it's more than you know, felt safety. It's more than just feeling care. It's show me, prove me that you care. I think being actively curious is incredibly important. Going out and looking at people. The best organizations, and I'm going to cite Transport for London as one of them, the best organizations have great active curiosity programs. The Environment Agency is also another great organization where it gets its managers to be curious. I'm running some training on curiosity at the moment for the Environment Agency, because they want to try and change the behavior of their managers. How do you encourage people to be curious? Because actually that is incredibly important. And then finally, come back to the Sunday rulebook issue. The difference between workers imagined and workers lived. When you write your risk assessment, you're typically in a room with a few people, you're talking about work, and basically you create an imaginary landscape. This is what I think the job is. But actually, workers' experience, workers' lived can be very different. And there is a lot of research on two things. The first of which is drift into accidents. You start off really great, but you gradually get worse as you go on. And also the accumulation of little things. And as those little things accumulate, you are prone to have accidents, as that kind of the whole set of bad habits build up, and blimey, it's too late. And as Ed Sheeran would say, bad habits are not really good. So folks, on that bombshell, I will leave you, unless there's anything else, Nicole. But thank you all for listening. If you've got any, oh my goodness,
any questions?
Any of those questions? Yeah, yes. I've been Nigel Heaton. That's who I am. That's where we are. If you've got any questions, either go through Nicole, or if you're desperate. To me, I'm really good at answering emails and phone calls, but it sometimes takes me more than a day, as Nicole will know. But I do always do my best. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Nigel. As always, really interesting and kind of thought-provoking, which is why I always love kind of listening to you, and it always adds a new angle to kind of a very dry subject, if you like, about kind of risk assessment. But I think it gets to the heart of what we actually need to do. And I love the idea that actually it is also about caring, isn't it? You know, and I think
absolutely is
showing that you care. Cool, thank you. Nigel, I know you're probably going to hang around for a little while, but I appreciate you've got a busy day. So if there are any more questions, we'll come make sure that they come to you after the event.
I hope to be listening for most of it this morning.
Thank you. We're going to try and go back to Barbara Hockey now from the HSE, just to see if we can possibly get her to finish her last few thoughts that we did earlier. Barbara, are you there? I know I'm going to have to control your slides for you, and we're not going to be able to see you.
I am. So
perfect.
We've resorted to the personal phone on the app, so hopefully this will work. I'm so sorry, technology. So well, it's quite interesting to follow Nigel after that, when it's like talking about some, you know, really serious cases where things have gone wrong. And I want to flip it back to from where I'm coming from, looking at the home environment. And I think it's fair to say this should be a relatively low risk environment for those people working at home. However, the employer's health and safety responsibilities remain the same. So you still have that duty of care, and to make sure that the home environment is suitable, is safe for the employee to work there. And the guidance that we've had up on our website up until recently, or it's still there at the moment, but what we're working on has been about being in a temporary situation and what you need to do in a temporary situation. And clearly, as I mentioned earlier, things are changing. People are going to be working at home a lot more, even in a hybrid situation. And that's not going to be a temporary situation. And so what is the law in this area? But firstly, thinking about the working environment, and I think there's two pictures there on the screen that you can see, and clearly we've all sat with a laptop on our knee, or most of us will have done, sitting on the floor and doing multitasking, doing other things at the same time. However, that's not a suitable work environment, and it's not sustainable. And that's where people are going to be at greater risks of MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders, or repetitive strain injuries. And I think what we want to do with our guidance is to help people understand what's a good workstation that would look like. And then the other image is a guy sitting at a desk with his monitor on a stand and those sorts of things. So the guidance will give you that. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Nicole.
No worries. Bear with me, Barbara. Sorry. There we go.
So I think we could all appreciate that the home environment should be relatively low risk, but it's not without risk. And one of the things is around the display screen equipment. And these are the specific regulations that need to be complied with. And the regulations say, I mean, I think they were written in, from the early 80s. So it's very different maybe to what's there today, but nevertheless, they're what's in place. And even just the term display screen equipment, anyone who's worked on a PC in the workplace will have probably done a DSE risk assessment, usually through an online questionnaire, and that guides and supports a self-assessment, and it can lead to where additional equipment is necessary. The regulations say that if you are using DSE equipment habitually, then you need to do a risk assessment for that. And then you go, well, what does that mean? What does habitually mean? Well, we've defined that as an hour or more of continuous use. So even if you're only doing this one day a week, if you're going to be on the laptop or the PC for more than an hour, then the employer should be making sure that there's a DSE risk assessment. And that will help people to set up their workstation correctly, to understand maybe if there's additional equipment that might be needed. It sounds very worrying to say we've got to do another risk assessment, but it can just be an extension of the online risk assessment that's used in the workplace. It just needs to allow or accommodate the fact that there might be another location where somebody works at. So certainly for us within HSE, that's what we're looking to do, to extend our online risk assessment to cover another workstation. It doesn't mean that people need to go and do a personal visit into everybody else's home. So I think that's one of the concerns people have about this. Okay, if we could move to the next screen. I should just say that just on the DSE, where additional equipment is required, what employers are probably concerned about is like, well, do I need to duplicate everything? So I've got like an expensive desk, a high rise, a desk that can be adjusted, a height adjustable desk at home. Do I need to provide that for the person working at home as well? Well, you have to do what's reasonable, and that's probably where it would be unreasonable to expect a high cost item when there is one suitable in the other workplace. Most people who work in a hybrid way will be doing it by consent, but things like such as a mouse or a webcam, that might be something that could be easily duplicated and shared with somebody, that people could have, both at home and in the office. So also, so on this slide, it's about stress and well-being. So this is the other risk that people face at in the working at home. And I briefly talked about earlier about the isolation and how you can feel quite lonely working on your own, how you keep in touch, and how people might not be able to spot the signs, excuse me, that somebody is feeling stressed or that what their well-being situation is. the HSE website, we've got some really good information on there. It's quite long standing. Some of the stress management standards have been around a long time, and they apply to a large organisation, an organisational approach rather than an individual approach. But we've also got some talking toolkits there, but they can be really helpful and help signpost managers as to what they might want to look out for. So I think, you know, we all recognise that it's poor communication is probably one of the real challenges for anyone who's been a lone worker or has to manage a lone worker, that it actually requires a real effort to have build those working relationships that are remote, and how you can keep in touch. And I mean, you know, personally, from my own experience, we've seen some really good examples within HSE on how we've done that. We've probably, you know, done far more for senior managers to be talking to teams and to individuals than ever before, and that's something that we want to hang on to and carry that forward. And I would imagine a lot of organisations are in that situation. So we could move to the next slide, please, Nicole. I feel a bit like Chris Whitty saying this.
You should be able to see the next slide now, Barbara.
Okay, so this is just to summarise really. So our home worker guidance, we're expanding it to cover off just some of those, a few elements that I've highlighted there. But what it will do, it will provide clear advice on what employers must do, some practical steps on how they can assure themselves that the home environment is suitable, but keeping this proportionate and focusing on the importance of good conversations and communication channels. And there'll also be some guidance for employees and what their role is in keeping themselves safe at work, how it's important to have a suitable area within the home that you can call your workspace. It really helps to have it, you know, as if where possible, you know, not everyone's got this like luxurious position of another room they can use, but if you can, just keeping that as a workplace that you don't have to put away all, you know, after every session. But we're just in the final stages of drafting, and it should be published in the next couple of weeks. It will hopefully fill that gap where people have got these questions where they, you know, they're not used to having all of these people working at home. So apologies again, this has been a really disjointed presentation, really challenging for me as a lone worker at home, trying to navigate my way through this. But I'm very happy to take any questions, or come back to Nicole later with any other questions, or people can contact me directly. It's not a problem at all.
Thank you, Barbara. It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that we're talking about kind of working from home and the stress, the work-related stress that can be linked to it. And there you are kind of struggling this morning with the IT issues and nobody to kind of get you back on track. So it kind of just proves the point, I guess. But thank you for that. There were a couple of questions that came in, but actually you answered both of them as you're going through the session. Just to kind of reiterate, but somebody was saying about, do I need to visit home workers to check that their home working environment is safe? But I think you said that you wouldn't expect people to go out and to do a check on everybody's home. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. In general, that wouldn't be applicable. I mean, there may be certain situations, you know, somebody, you know, I've had experience where somebody was a permanent home worker due to medical conditions, and we needed to make sure that the office environment they had set up at home was absolutely suitable for their needs, and that did require a personal visit. But that's really, you know, that should be, you know, the exception rather than the norm. For most people, you can do this by for the managers to be having that conversation with the worker. What have you got at home? You know, can you work there properly? Is it a good place for you to work? And if it's not, and if it's just by agreement, then it should be easy for the manager to say, well, actually, it'd be better for you to come into the office, you know. I appreciate not every job allows you to do that, but you know, that should be the fallback position, that if the home isn't the right place, well, where else would be, and what else can we do?
And I know you and I had that conversation yesterday, linked to domestic violence as well, and kind of thinking about, you know, if people are at home in an unsafe or a hostile environment, that, you know, workplaces should try and do all they can to open up somewhere else for that person to work.
Yeah, and that would be down to the policies of that particular business to have considered some of those issues. And when you're checking that somebody can work at home and it's safe for them to work at home and it's a suitable work environment,
if there were those concerns, you'd hope the employee would be able to tell you that, and then work together on finding a good solution in that individual circumstance. But hopefully most people aren't in that situation.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, Barbara. And thank you for sticking with it this morning, and for jumping on and off the call as well. Really appreciate your tenacity and ability to get there in the end. So thank you so much for that. If there are any questions that come in for you, Barbara, afterwards, I'll make sure that they're passed on. And what we'll do is any questions for any of the speakers that don't get answered today, we'll put them up on our website as well, so that people who have joined can have a look at those too. So thank you once again. It's been really good to have you with us, and likewise for Nigel as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on now. I'm going to have to just shift my slides because obviously we're kind of all over the deck at the moment. This is kind of testing my technical skills as well. And talking about technology, we're moving on to Rob Harris. God, that was a seamless link. Rob Harris from Solar Protect, but he's going to be talking about technology and communication and finding the right fit for your lone and remote workers. So Rob, I'm hoping that you're there and with us at the moment.
I am. Hello,
Fabulous.
Good morning.
We can even see you, which is amazing.
Yeah, I should apologise in advance.
No, you're all right. So I'm just going to hand over the mouse control to you, so you now have control of the screen and your own slides.
Okay, here goes. So it's a click and then an
breathe.
arrow. Let's see.
Click on the slide first and then you can move them. There you go.
Okay, right. Thank you, Nicole. So good morning, everyone. I think I've missed a slide there by accident, but anyway, the basis of today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rob Harris. I work for a company called Solar Protect. This session is really on technology and communication as build. So it's very much considerations about finding the right fit within a lone worker solution for employers, obviously, and for the people they employ. So it's just a few of those considerations when looking into that. In terms of just starting out, I think I just want to introduce you very briefly to Solar Protect. We were formed in 2003, and we're an end-to-end lone worker solution provider. So that means that we develop device and lone worker applications. We're also an alarm receiving centre operator in the UK, and we're an end solution provider. So we work in the UK, the US, and a number of EU countries. And obviously we work directly with employers to reduce risk to their personnel. In terms of who we work with, there we go, that was seamless. In terms of who we work with, it's really companies of any shape and size. So,
Got coffee.
yes, please.
I'm going to go and get one. See you in a minute.
So yeah, in terms of who we work with, it's companies in the public sector, the private sector, the third sector. They can be SMEs, they can be LEs, and it is about just aligning with the needs of the employer to reduce risk to their people. I think that's clearly the priority for all parties. Just trying to move on there, Nicole. I'll just give it another second. I appear to have frozen, Nicole. I don't know if you're able to jog me a slide on, please. Thank you. Yeah, so contents of the session, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I think it's just like build. It's the considerations that are useful to think about for variety of people across an organisation deploying a solution, how they kind of tackle the various stages of implementation, some solution specifics, and then I guess some kind of state of the day type considerations about where we're at in the world at the moment. So if we move on to pre-implementation, Okay, so this is really about addressing the question of what's important. So typically at the outset of a project, there's a lot of activity, and that's always great. You know, we naturally want to attack a to-do list and tick off items and deliver those items. But also, I think before we really rush headlong into that, it's about defining success. So what is success for the organisation in question? You know, what is really driving them? What do they need to solve, and what do they want to see within a certain time? What are the key reasons for entering the market and engaging with people? Is there a gap in process that's been kind of highlighted? Is it that your employees are talking to you about these kind of issues? And how do the needs vary, you know, across the organisation? If you do need a technology solution, what does it need in order to be viewed as successful? And if you define that success, you have a headline, but you also have a yardstick to measure against and a goal to enthuse others really. In terms of key search drivers, obviously safety of personnel is, you know, quite rightly, often the primary reason, and the reason for that could be, you know, a trigger incident, and it could lead to you know, a period of kind of high activity and searching in the aftermath of an event, or is it just that a project has been reprioritized for review, and now it's the right time to address? So in terms of the wider solution, what value are you looking to add as part of that investment? Clearly, there's an investment to be made in safety, and that's great, and that's you know, that's great to demonstrate and just flags with some of the previous stuff that was just being covered there. But additionally to that, what does that investment allow you to leverage in terms of value to the organisation? That's not a cynical exercise. It's very much just getting a return on your investment. So whether it's kind of easing operations, whether it's giving you better data, whether it's visibility of personnel, something that adds value to your parallel function. And then past experience, clearly past experience is great to learn from, and it can be a positive and a negative for various people, and you know, depending on where you sit in an organisation and how involved you've been may affect that in different ways. But I think it's very clear, if you are engaging with the market again, to whether it's your first implementation or a replacing one, it's just to try and be very clear with the supplier or suppliers you're talking to about the problems you face, what you want to solve, and I guess what you want to avoid as much as anything, because that can give them a real steer, not in terms of kind of just referencing and kind of just talk to kind of get around that, but very much something that can be directly addressed and really kind of tailored where possible. So on to planning and communication. Just trying to move down. Right. So I mean, it is an obvious thing to say, but you know, absolutely, you need to have a plan, and we just talked about communication, the importance of communication around lone working there. What's the desired outcome? What are the timings that you need to kind of factor in terms of implementing? What are the various stages of processes that we deliver, whether it's, you know, talking to people, whether it's making commercial decisions, and whether it's implementing and training people. All of these things should be built in from end to end, and it's not just about thinking, you know, drawing a line in the sand once you've gone live and you've implemented it. That's almost when you know, a lot of a next phase of work begins, really. So it's having that plan, and it's being very, very transparent about it, because that will help you address bumps in the road or difficult conversations as you go through this and talk internally about it. On communication, I've said there, you know, be early, be concise, and be consistent. And I think that's sometimes there can be an urgency to communicate, and that's very valid. But you don't want to rush that and say the wrong thing equally. So it's good to communicate early, but once you know your message and that you've considered all the relevant stakeholders. So, you know, be clear for the reasons of implementation, and be clear about the benefits, and be open about the investment in people that you're making, not in a financial sense, but investment in terms of the organisation, what that means operationally, and really where you need buy-in from your teams to deliver that. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to have the successful implementation that you're looking for. So involving stakeholders is key, and then set milestones. And this is very much a shared thing, and I think it's often something we try and avoid, in terms of we don't want to see a set of actions that are delivered by us and then a set that are delivered by a would-be customer. I think it's very much, how is that tied together into a shared list of deliverables that are jointly kind of targeted to achieve, and inevitably it's very much a joint process that needs all parties working together. And frankly, a good supplier should be talking to you about those and very much framing them for you to help you get through that process and tie into various internal communications. And then I guess platform for open dialogue. This is really the other side of the same coin in terms of involving stakeholders. I think you need people to be open and honest, and I think that comes out of the quote below, which is from a health and safety professional that I happen to follow on Twitter. It is about relationships. If you can't be open and honest with people, it's going to cause problems potentially. So you want openness from your team, you want transparency, and that will help feed into the process. And then it's considering the effects on policy. Now, clearly, health and safety professionals have a great handle on policies in relation to lone working, but I suppose it's just whether or not that does enough to address the technology, and whether that needs to be updated, expanded, just revisited, and how does that feed into your culture? Ultimately, it's about that. Okay, so risk profile application. So again, from the outset, has the employer, and that's not just falling on health and safety professional, but has the employer as a body corporate understood the risks that staff face? Clearly, any technology you implement needs to be applicable to the risk. Its capabilities need to be clearly understood, as its limitations also. And staff need to be trained and supported in order to maximise that. So, is it that the risk is a social one, posing verbal abuse or attack risk, or is it environmental? So things like incapacitation or a person down potential outcome. And it also comes down to frequency as well. We talked about home working there. And clearly that's been something that's loomed large over the last year or so. What is the frequency of risk being faced? Clearly, home working isn't typically considered high risk, for example, but you still have that kind of requirement to think about those kind of considerations in relation to mobile teams. Okay, so form factor and usability. I think first impressions obviously count. So people often make a decision based on what they see from an initial impression. I think whilst they count, they're often undermined if the supporting experience undermines it over time. So design to stick. It's about consumer design elements. So things like touchscreens or graphical user interfaces. All those things that really, I suppose, developers are targeted to design to make for a stickier experience for the user, because that helps adoption. Clearly, attitudes to tech continue to be blurred slightly between use of work and home, particularly when you have the scenario you've had over the last year as well. So increasingly, I think it's not okay for people to think that, that's okay for work kind of thing, and expect people to really be delighted in terms of experience. In terms of what people expect, it's about considered intuitive designs and simplicity. Really, it's not got to be bells and whistles, but it's got to be simple, and it's got to work for application. So form factor in application. How important is discretion, for example, for a user's job role? That will have a massive effect on the form factor that works for them. It may be more aligned to a social risk scenario. Clearly, if it's a mobile user, particularly, they may want an application because they may be working at home, or they may be community based, or they may be considered lower risk in terms of their role. And then clearly, it's also about apparel. So, does any solution fit within the realms of what a worker already has to get to grips with on a daily basis? So, if they work on site, do they already carry significant kit? Do they have tablet devices, etc.? Is their primary requirement something that isn't cumbersome, and something that just doesn't get in the way? So I think it's stating the obvious, but forms obviously got to allow effective usage in line with job role, and it's got to be accessible to reduce the risk and effective at doing so. Okay. So depth of the solution. So I think it's thinking about the supporting mechanisms behind that. Oh yeah, we've seen a device and we like that, and we think our team would use it. But when you scratch the surface, what's going on beyond that? So it's thinking about those stages and considering, how does the solution onboard your users? How does it get them to access information properly as needed, easily when it's needed? How do they get training, etc.? How easy is the solution to deploy? So again, logistics around getting devices in people's hands. And again, that's been a very different scenario over the last year or so. And then in terms of admins and department managers, how easy is it to get users set up initially? How is it easy to assign devices and applications? And all of these items are often now driven by software interfaces that are there to support the lone worker manager or the health and safety person. And I think it also just, in addition to that, it's also worth considering monitoring by the supplier. So accreditation in the alarm receiving centre, robustness of systems, some of those metrics that all ARC operators have available to potential customers, that just indicate the level of service that they're able to provide as part of that. Okay. Oh, sorry, we've gone on there by mistake. Oh, yeah. So control service elements. How many elements of the service do people control? Is it in-house? Does it allow benchmarking and a clear handle on the service you're receiving as part of that process? Does it allow your I suppose administrators not just to get swamped with a load of admin? What tools exist there to make their lives easier, because the success of a solution shouldn't fall on a single person to administer. Clearly, it's got to be something that facilitates empowerment across various departments and all areas of the organisation, so that it really kind of keeps everyone kind of accountable and focused. And then I suppose visibility. How does greater visibility help you managers drive efficiency? How does it make it easier for operational decisions to be made? And does it allow better communication generally? Things like mass notifications as a feature and automated rules is increasingly seen as something now that is being built into these offerings. So it's those kind of questions as well.
Rob, we are running very short of time, so I'm going to ask
Okay.
you if you can just perhaps just quickly whiz through your last 3 slides, and we'll make sure that any questions that people have got come back to you after.
Sure.
We're very aware of our people being kept waiting.
Okay, no problem. So we'll skip past this one. I think that just underpins all of the previous point, really. So I'll skip through that next one. I think in terms of return on investment, I think very quickly, reporting has got to be relevant. It's no longer seen as an added bonus or an add-on. It's got to be driven by roles. It's got to add value. It's got to be relevant to the person, and it's got to help them make decisions, and that feeds into operational value. So, you've got to maximise the value of the investment, and that means, does this help me make decisions that are good on a day-to-day basis? In terms of data, clearly all information has to be accessible, and again, it's got to be staged in terms of what is going to be useful. So whether you're a C-suite kind of team member, or whether you're a department manager, it's got to be relevant to you. It's got to help you. If we sketch on to the closing stage, I think just a very quick touch on where we're at kind of currently. I think all of this continues to affect how you implement a solution. You have employees that are continuing to have non-standard work models, and that has benefits and negatives sometimes. But I think employers also are continuing to want to retain flexibility around hybrid working. So you're seeing remote working remaining high. You're seeing employers want to talent share across various business units, and they also want to keep contingent workers as they kind of roll with the punches that COVID have been delivering. So that continues to present an ongoing challenge for all professionals, but certainly health and safety when we apply these kind of solutions. So diversity of approaches continue to be needed. We know that duty of care remains, whether you're working at home or not. But I think whilst some of the agreements tend to be slightly more rigid, I think it's important to try and keep a dynamic approach to review and allocate solutions to members of your teams, and working with a supplier that can help you do that is obviously a good idea. I think that's me done, Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. And I'm sorry for rushing you there at the end. Say, as you know, we've had a few technical issues this morning, so appreciate your time.
That's fine.
I think it's interesting for me. The one thing that I've kind of taken away from that is that it's not one size fits all, and you've got to go through the process to find out which kind of solution is going to work for your organisation. And what you did was talk us through very clearly kind of some of the steps that might be helpful for people. So if there are any questions for Rob afterwards, then what we'll do again is get those out to you, Rob, and get those answered via our website, if that's okay with you, just to keep us moving on to the session. Thank you. Thanks very much for your time this morning. Appreciate it. And thank you to Solar to Protect for helping to sponsor the event this morning as well. So we're moving on now to Dr. Karen McDonald. Some of you may have come across Karen before. I have to say I've been trying for a good few years to get her to come and talk at our sessions and at the event. So I'm really pleased that she's with us this morning. Having said that, are you with us this morning, Karen? Are you there?
I am indeed, yeah.
Amazing, thank you. I kind of feel like that moment I sort of did that Eurovision thing where, we're going to Helsinki next, and are you really there? Where are you, Karen? Where in the world are you? Are we talking to you?
I'm based just above Edinburgh in Scotland. You'll worked out the Scottish accent already, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Well, Karen is the OSH policy advisor to ROSPA and also the head of ROSPA Scotland, and we asked her to talk about one of the subjects that I know is very dear to her heart. And as Nigel said earlier, driving is going to be one of the biggest risks for all of our organisations. We all have people who are out there working, so I think this is going to be very, very relevant. Please just remind you, if you've got questions for Karen, pop those in the Q&A box. We'll try and pose those to Karen at the end. Karen, I'm going to hand over control, and hopefully if you click on the slide, you should then be able to move your own slides. But if you have a problem, just give me a shout. Oh, and I think you clicked absolutely loads there. So I'm going to get you right back to the beginning. Let's try.
Even with simple instructions, I don't always follow them.
It's okay, don't worry. It's going to take me a minute just to get you back here because okay, if you can stop clicking for a second, Karen, I'm going to get you out of there and I'll get you back to where we were. I'm just loving technology this morning. I don't think I ever want to sit at a computer ever again, to be perfectly honest with you. Bear with us, folks. We seem to have lost our slides altogether there. So Karen, do just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and why you're doing this project.
Well, I work for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, and one of our key issues working with our National Occupational Safety and Health Committee for the last couple of years has indeed been lone and vulnerable workers, including those who drive for work. So the opportunity to speak about this today is hugely valuable to us. ROSPA are a registered charity who are focused on having more lives free from serious accidental injuries through the exchange of life-enhancing knowledges and skills. And that's again where today fits. I'm going to move on with one click. And I've got to have patience.
There's something is sticking on your keyboard, Karen. Something is sticking.
I'm using the mouse actually.
Yeah, something is sticking. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to just move them for you. I think it's going to be easier because we've got the same issue, I think.
That's strange. Well, essentially, I mentioned our mission and vision earlier. And when thinking about how this piece of work fits within our overall mission and vision, my work as OSH policy advisor is underpinned by this whole person, whole life approach to prevention that I'm pretty certain everybody on the call today will recognise. Quite simply, accidents and cases of occupational ill health don't need to happen. We've all recognised, and we recognise increasingly, that safe and healthy work underpins success, and that freedom from harm is an important goal for society. And fundamentally, people deserve to be protected. Our focus, if we could have the next slide, please. Our focus through our National Occupational Safety and Health Committee, at the outset of 2020, my vision was very much about making this piece of work more visible and connected. And you'll see in front of you there, it was called a junior spirograph. I had one when I was a lot younger, and I really like that system of the wheel within the wheel. And our work is driven by data and evidence, and we have dialogue around and about the data, and then we tell the personal stories that really make a difference. So that wheel within a wheel and that visible and connected approach to our work certainly was our focus at the start of 2020, and then COVID happened. And the sort of more sophisticated spirograph there is that whole piece about lots of noise, about lots of different things, but at the heart of our work was the importance of protecting lone and vulnerable workers, focusing particularly on those who drive for work. And we very much looked at what the WHO was saying about COVID and COVID noise, and about the importance of simplifying complex messages. And our approach was very much to look at an instruction to follow, a behaviour to adopt, and information to share. And I think that when you're communicating with your lone and vulnerable workers, are you really achieving this? Are you giving them those simple messages that make sure they remain situationally aware within the environment that they're operating in? Could you have the next slide, please? We very much welcome the new HSE guidance, which is on its way to us. We're very pleased to have had an opportunity to participate in the consultation exercise. And what you see in front of you here, and I know this will have been covered earlier this morning, but the point is bullet point 2, delivery drivers, health workers and engineers, the importance of those who drive for work. And increasingly, as the pandemic has evolved, you see the focus that's been placed on moving things around the country to get things from A to B, whether it's people or objects, the key person in the value chain, because that's the way I now refer to it, it's where the supply chain, the value chain is the value that's behind the wheel and the value of that lone worker that's indeed driving for work. So it was very much about, as I say, keeping this very visible. And I know we've not got an awful lot of time to pause this morning, Nicole. However, you know, our approach all the way through has been about pause, reflect and reset. So pause, prioritise your people, recognise their value, assess the risk of COVID, but remain situationally aware. Focus on your driving risk. This mnemonic can apply to any situation, but focus on those lone and vulnerable workers who drive for work. update your risk management plan, speak to your people, and then evaluate the difference the interventions have made. And I think that's the key point from this particular slide, is the evaluation piece. What difference has it made as you reflect back to move forward and perhaps reset your teams? And for the rest of this morning, I'm going to just give you an insight into why fatigue, why it's important to think about fatigue and driving risk. Could I have the next slide, please? So fundamentally, why fatigue? It's a whole person, whole life topic. It's well recognised that the emotional depletion and tsunami of mental health concerns will impact on people's sleep. And tired individuals are predisposed to risk as a consequence. So it's this major unrecognised hazard in the workplace that adversely affects your people's health, safety and well-being. And it's a personal sustainability that underpins organisational effectiveness. So that's very much why the focus on fatigue. And I thought that I would just give you a very brief insight into the importance of sleep and refer you on to some signposts that you can use to understand this topic more widely. There is this conversation about good work and good work being good for you, but we know that good work's not always good every day. But the whole piece about good sleep is that it varies very much person to person. So how much, what does quality sleep feel like? How healthy is your sleep? Do you prioritise your sleep? Do you set a time that you take time out to sleep? Do you prepare to go to sleep in an evening? Do you make sure there are no distractions, that you'd sort of move yourself away from all electronic equipment an hour before you go to sleep? All these different things, all these different factors that can have an impact. And I'd like to just at this point mention the Sleep Charity. I'm on the Sleep Charity Advisory Board, and they recognise that it's a major factor for health and well-being, both physical and mental. So it's important that you prioritise it, and it's important that you speak to your teams about sleep, fatigue and sleep hygiene. Can I have the next slide, please? So data drives everything, doesn't it? So the facts here, that up to 20% of road accidents and 25% of fatal and serious injuries is a factor. And 50% of those are more likely to result in death or serious injury, as they tend to be high impact. So think about at the moment about the number of people who you've got driving for work, driving and riding for work, whether they're travelling on powered two-wheelers. Think about the impact of the pandemic and how the ways in which people get to and from work may also have changed. So very much a focus, that pause, reflect and reset your organisation around this topic. Can I have the next slide, please? So crashes caused by tired drivers are most likely to happen. And again, think about this in your own personal downtime driving, and also for those who drive for work. Long journeys on monotonous roads between the hours of 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning, or 2 and 4 in the afternoon. If you've had a little less sleep than normal, you know, what's changed in your life that might mean you're having less sleep than normal after drinking alcohol or taking medication, whether that's prescription medication. I had a visit to the chemist the other week to get some medication for one of my family, and the first thing to check is, would it impact on the driving? So very important to understand those elements there, after working long hours or on journeys home after long shifts. So again, we know when these happen. So what can you do to make sure you plan around these potential circumstances? Can I have the next slide, please? The drivers that are most at risk, and just as a general term here, if you drive more than 25,000 miles a year, you're as likely to be killed at work as if you work in the construction or quarrying sector. So sitting in that nice, comfortable vehicle, the right temperature, you know, very comfortable driving about the country on behalf of your employer, you are as at risk. If you're reaching those types of miles, you're as at risk of a fatality as if you work in construction or quarrying. So we're looking here at young male drivers, truck drivers, very topical at the moment, company vehicle drivers, shift workers and medical professionals. You know, the shift workers driving home from work after an overnight shift, or after a number of shifts, and those medical professionals. And here, what jumps out here are those key and essential workers who have driven throughout the pandemic, and the type of work they're doing and how it's impacting on their physiology and their psychological well-being also is something to bear in mind. So what does the Highway Code say? Can I have the next slide, please? Driving, the Highway Code is a personal responsibility, so Rule 91 very much applies to everybody. Make sure you're fit to drive. Avoid undertaking long journeys between midnight and 6 in the morning. Take a minimum break of at least 15 minutes after every 2 hours of driving. It's a recommendation. If we were in a room, I'd ask everyone to put their hands up and say how diligently they do this. If you're sleepy, stop in a safe place. And then the 2 cups of caffeinated coffee and a 15-minute nap. So that's what the Highway Code says. That's your responsibility as a driver. The personal responsibility about making sure you're fit to drive. And this for me is an example of an instruction to follow, behaviour to adopt, and information to share. I was listening to a presentation recently, and I do love a good mnemonic, and it was HALT. And it said, if you're hungry, angry, late or tired, think before you drive. So can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of medical conditions, as employers, you would need to understand the medical conditions that might impact on people's fitness to drive. There are obviously a list of prescribed conditions that DVLA have an impact on people's ability to drive. We recently did some work, SCORSA that is, did some work with Diabetes Safety UK and can share a fact sheet on diabetes and work if that would be useful. The consideration of temporary illness, and here I'm also thinking about return to work after a temporary illness, or perhaps this return to work after a period of absence as a consequence of the pandemic. People have been, we mothballed our fleets. We have our, we have people working from home that over time will go back to driving to work. And whilst the space hasn't changed much, the roads and structures are pretty much the same. The ways in which these roads are being used may be different. It's widely recognised, instead of a second car, people are perhaps having a powered two-wheeler to move to and from work, and also taking sort of the cycle to work and active travel approaches. So to think about what that roadscape is and how you reintroduce your people to it. The considerations around about substance use or abuse, the whole self-medication piece, and the prescription medication implications. And finally, the environment in which they work, live and drive. And the working and living, I've heard it referred to as living in work, what I've been doing, and most of us been doing for quite a long time now. So again, something for you to consider. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of managing fatigue in the workplace, the whole element around about risk assessments being covered from a lone and vulnerable work perspective already this morning, and those are the elements there to think about your workers, because people deserve to be protected, to have that dialogue around and about policies and communication within your organisation, supporting people with training and really raising awareness of the issue, and the fact that it's a shared issue. It's not unique to individuals. I read recently in a publication that was relating to the aviation industry that said that fatigue was like a toxin that builds up in the body. And again, that resonated with me, that general sort of emotional depletion as a consequence of keeping focused and keeping messages moving around, which is what I do, or keeping things moving around the country, which is what our people who drive for work do. Can I have the next slide, please? So what I'd like to do now is, will you click that when I've just done a little bit of introduction? Yeah, thanks very much. So I thought of what I'd like to do here is, and this is a YouTube clip that you can use in your own organisation. It's only 30 seconds long. I had a technical issue using it previously, whereby the organiser I shared it with only had the sound clip the first time around, and it actually worked really well. Because you heard the sequence of events and then we watched the sequence of events. And this is what it's like. Driving tired kills. This is a fact, and behind each data point is a person, their family, and co-workers. So have 30 seconds to reflect on this. And that 30-second micro sleep can result in a fatality or a serious injury. The resources that are in this clip are also all available online. So the whole piece about employer and employee responsibility you see in front of you here. I refer to this as like an ouch model. You've to own it, understand it, control it, and treat it holistically. It's very multifactorial, that blend of life away from work and organisational factors, life away from work, work duration and work demands. A different blend for every person you employ probably that does need to have that conversation. So very important to understand it from everybody's perspective, to have that holistic understanding of how to move forward and keep people more safe whilst driving for work. Can I have the next slide, please? We talk about data, we have the dialogue, as you saw in that, the work demands, that blend, that different equation for each of us. But behind the data point, for each conversation I have within my work as a nurse policy advisor, it's all based on people, really. So in front of you see the two names, Zach Payne and Michael Morris. Zach Payne had driven just over 500 miles in a period of 24 hours and worked a shift. And on the way back from their place of work, there was an accident and both Zach Payne and Michael Morris were killed. Renowned consultants, the case was brought by the Office of the Road Regulator. Renowned consultants were fined £450,000 for failing to ensure, and think about these words, sufficiently rested to work and travel safely. And it's a reminder to companies that safety comes first, and fatigue policies should be enforced to ensure their workforce is not too tired to work. So it's a 3D approach. It's data, dialogue, and this discourse, this personal story that sometimes is what makes it stick. Something else that came out as this case was investigated was that the organisation had insurance in place that said nobody under the age of 25 was to drive company vehicles, and it was found that this was routinely flouted. So again, just think about your organisation and have the dialogue, have the systems in place, but make sure that they are implemented in practice. And if I can move on to the final slide. I always think move on to the final slide's great for you, Nicole, you know, just to know that it's hopefully keeping you a bit on time. This work that I'm talking to you about is part of work that I do delivering at a programme, the Scottish Occupational Road Safety Alliance, which connects organisations that are wholly or partly based in Scotland around and about this topic of driving risk. We provide free information and advice, and I've been more than delighted to invite your audience today to participate in SCORE. So it's very straightforward. There's no cost attached whatsoever. And just in closing, a quote by Isaac Asimov that I really like, and I think it reflects well on this morning in terms of lone and vulnerable workers and those who drive for work. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. So what we assume we know about our lone and vulnerable workers are our windows on the world. But if we don't dust them off every once in a while, the light won't shine in. So I would encourage you to dust off what you've been thinking about lone and vulnerable workers driving for work, and make the connection with SCORSA and the sleep charity, and together we can continue to raise awareness and reduce the toll of injury as a consequence of fatigue and driving. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. A very good point to end on as well. And thank you for sharing that information about SCORSA as well. I think that's a great organisation. Is there something equivalent to that kind of south of the border, do you know?
There's different options. Driving for Better Business is available in England. I think it's England only. It may extend to Wales, but SCORSA's got membership all around the world.
Ah, okay, fabulous.
So it is, and the principles are the same. So there's no issue there. And if anybody connected to your network wants any business-to-business learning through SCORSA, I'd be delighted to help with that. And then share it back with you.
I've got a couple of questions for you actually that have come in, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One's just a very straightforward question, which may not have a straightforward answer. How many hours should somebody drive a day if they're also doing an 8-hour working day?
I think this is a data piece where you have to understand that fatigue and accidents is an issue. And then you need to look at your journey planning. So the basics underpin the risk assessment. So it should be risk assessment based with the journey planning, vehicle checks, driver health checks, the whole piece. But it's a very vibrant conversation at the moment. Let's just say that.
I knew it wasn't going to be a straightforward answer to that one, most definitely. And in addition to that then, what extra considerations should be made for retail workers or other workers who are working night shifts alone and wouldn't have time to take regular breaks?
I think it's part of a conversation that we should be encouraging now, or potentiating now, because the pace of change during the pandemic, that pause, reflect and reset, that I've got many examples of people coming off shift and driving a very short distance home and having like killed or seriously injured as a consequence. So I think it's an opportunity for us to think about the value of our workers, you know, the value of somebody consistently coming to their work and performing well, and to build in the right breaks for them to enable them to do that on behalf of the organisation has to be a very worthy conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, Karen. We have got another couple of questions, but what I'm going to do is get those to you afterwards. And as I've said previously, we'll answer those on the website, just in the spirit of trying to keep to time this morning. But thank you so much. That was a really interesting session. I'm sure that our audience will have taken a lot away from that. So thank you very much. We're going to whiz straight through now to Chris Allcard, who's then going to be followed by Matthew Colley. Chris works for Alliance Protect and Matthew works for Loan Alert. They're two other sponsors of our event this morning. So Chris is going to be talking specifically about body-worn videos. We are going to try to get to to Heather Beach by 12:30. So we'll see how we go with questions with these guys. But Chris, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well, Nicole. Thank you very much for inviting us in on the event.
You're welcome.
And it's a shame we can't do it in person, but we'll get there.
We'll get there eventually. We'll get there eventually. So, Chris, if you can just click the slide, and then you should be able to move forward. If not, I'm here to help you if you get stuck.
Okay, we'll give it a go. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, yes, still good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Just about.
Just about, yeah. Let me try that again. Okay. If it flicks onto another slide, I'll come back. But yes, so I'm going to just talk briefly about body-worn camera solutions. So Reliance Protect has done lone worker solutions for many years, 15 years plus, and we're increasingly getting into body-worn camera solutions because there is some overlap there. We don't treat them as a separate subject. There is some definite overlap. So as a brief history, and I didn't know this before I did a bit of research, but the UK Police in 2005 were the first organisation to embrace body-worn cameras, modern body-worn cameras, however you define modern body-worn cameras. But that was back in 2005, and of course now it's widely adopted globally. We see clips in the news. It's it's just widely adopted now. And the market growth on it is big. So I've got some stats. In 2018, it was worth 444 million. That's going to be a fourfold growth by 2026, up to $1.5 million. So it's a growth area, big growth area. So what's driving that growth? Two key areas for me. One, it's hugely powerful evidence capture, and it's the audio and the video, and it's right at the coalface. It's you know, you're wearing that camera. If you've got that, if you're in that situation, involved in the situation, being recorded, you know, it's not like a camera that's positioned 10, 20, 30 meters away that may have video, may have audio, or may not have audio. It's incredibly powerful evidence. And the primary reason why I got involved in body worn is that visual deterrence, and the fact that that can have a big effect on people's behaviour. When they're being recorded, they tend to act differently. Not all the time, not in all situations, but on the whole, people tend to act differently. They reduce that aggression, and therefore, as a control measure for the user, it means they're exposed to reduced levels of violence and aggression. And that's backed up with studies. A lot of those that we come across are sort of inter-company studies that aren't the public domain, but there are some good studies out there. A big one that recommend having a look at is one that was done by a mental health NHS trust back in 2017. That's a very comprehensive study, so I'd recommend that for a read. And finally, you've got the technology. The technology is moving at a pace, as you can imagine. You've gone from big, bulky record-only cameras to cameras that can now stream, and they'll be using 4 and 5G and Wi-Fi. You've got location technology in there, primarily GPS. If you're that mobile application, where are you when you're recording? Where are you if you need assistance? You've got Bluetooth in there and near NFC, near field comms. For linking in with other products, other hardware, or other systems. So that technology is driving and opening up the applications as well. So where do you see body-worn cameras now? So I've just listed a few examples. The ambulance service, and they did some big trials over the last few years. I mean, the government in the last 6 months plus has announced that rollout and funded, I think, sort of cameras out to all the ambulance service. So that's your ambulance crews, it's your fast responders. You're seeing it in retail, you're seeing a lot of convenience store applications, but you're also seeing it in wider retail and in shopping centres. The NHS, which I briefly talked about, we've got applications where you've got them on wards, mental health inpatient applications, learning disability applications. You also see it now, starting to see it in reception areas. You've got the security guards that are sometimes around the hospital site, so it's starting to roll out in the NHS. Security is the obvious one. Rail, I mean, last time I was a train coming up to Birmingham, Nicole, for the NEC, the ticket inspector had got a body-worn camera on. You sometimes see it with staff on the stations, so rail's a big area. And linked to that is transport and logistics. We've got some good trials on the go actually at the moment where you've got delivery drivers and transport, whether that's to the home or to warehousing and dead drop-offs at night. And there's sometimes you get targeted by organised crime, you know, if alcohol, cigarettes, white goods. So it's becoming a part of the toolkit in transport and logistics. Enforcement roles is more of a traditional one. So you've got parking enforcement, you know, debt collection type roles. We've got a confrontational situation with the public and service users. And last one that we're starting to see is social housing. So we've just done a good trial in a social housing organisation. They're starting to roll it out, and that's where we've got some overlap with those traditional lone worker type solutions. So that gives you a feel for some of this, and I dare say some of you have seen people wearing them in these applications. So I've got 4 key solution elements. And it's not all about the cameras. It's really not. Cameras are important, but the key bits around that as well to make sure it's a successful deployment and you're getting the value for money and maximising the benefits from cameras. So I will cover the obvious one first. We'll talk about the cameras. Things to consider here are the user application. How are you going to use those cameras? What sort of record time do you need? Are you going to record continuously? And how long is that battery? Is it going to cover that 8-hour, 12-hour shift? You know, incident record cameras tend to be smaller, lighter, because you don't need as much battery power as a bit larger battery. You don't need as much memory storage on there. So think about that user application right through to attachments of how you're going to wear that camera. again, if it's a big bulky camera and you're looking at sort of like the police applications and security, they have them on harnesses. That's not really going to suit clearly a convenience store worker. So think about the application and what that means in terms of the camera. You've also got things around sort of mobile workers. We touched on that. Does it need to have GPS in there? Do you need to know where that person is? I think maybe about the IP rating, kind of simple stuff. But is it rugged? Is it going to get damaged by water ingress at the first time it comes out? And also think about the encryption on there of those recordings and how you get that media, that video off the cameras into your video management system. So there's some things hopefully to think about on the camera side of things. Next one brief I'll talk about is the video management system, the VMS. So you've got the cameras. You need to be able to manage, view, delete and control that media that you're creating off the cameras. So firstly, how do you get the media into that video management system? Do you plug your camera into a local PC, and we'll come on to it in a bit, or is that uploaded over Wi-Fi, over the network? So I'll touch on that a bit later on. But also with the video management system, the other areas to consider are the feature set of that video VMS. So can you edit that footage? Can you redact? Can you blur out faces? Can you clip them? Can you mute certain audio? So what control and ability have you got to edit that media? Also, you're importing and exporting. Can you export that out? Have you got that audit trail? Can you keep the integrity of that recording? But also fundamental with that VMS is who's got access to it. What sort of permission levels and hierarchies are built into that platform? Could be really simple that you have a limited number of users that have got access to all that. They've got deletion rights and edit rights. But where you've got larger organizations, you may have multiple users of that system. You may have got a manager of a team, a local team that can only see the video from that local team. You may have a manager, then a senior manager that manages a department of multiple teams. They only want to see those multiple teams. They can't see others. Then you've got that central access. So what levels of hierarchy and permission levels do you have on that system? And is that going to fit the needs for your organization? A link to that then is the media storage. Hopefully that slide will move along. I'm always nervous, Nicole. If I press it once or twice, I'm going to suddenly scoot 2 slides ahead. Okay, so media storage. Again, think about the level, the amount of media you're going to create and where you're going to store that. Traditionally, that would be, you'll still see it today, where you plug that camera into a PC. That PC's got some software loaded onto it, and that media is held on that PC. Think about who's got access to that. What happens with that PC in terms of if it gets damaged or breaks down? Can you get that media footage off there? What deletion rights are on that? So that's the sort of traditional one going back a few years. You've then got the sort of on-premise, that's an on-premise solution. Further to that, you've got where the software, the VMS, and the footage is held at a network level within your organization. And then as you move into to a lot of offerings now, if you're starting to get to cloud-based storage, and the advantages clearly with the cloud storage is the scalability and capacity. It's the resilience and sort of disaster recovery built into that data center and and sort of the number of data centers used as part of that resilience. So you go from that local level PC right through to the cloud, and as you go along there, it's resilience, it's security and scalability you need to think about with that. Last but not least, you've got the live stream monitoring. So I'll let the slide catch up with a bit of luck. There we go. So live stream monitoring is the 4th element that I've put on there. That's, I suppose, relatively new in the body-worn camera sort of world. But there's applications where you have organizations that are monitoring those cameras live. They've got the control room, or it could be in a security office. You've got staff there looking at those situations, monitoring those situations. Got applications where you've actually got security guards on large sites that can actually look live on a smartphone at someone else when they've raised the alarm, so they can actually go and assist that individual, but actually can look at what they're they know what they're going to be attending. They can see the situation as they make their way to that situation. So you've got some options there when you're looking at live streaming within an organization. You've also got options if you want third parties to monitor that live stream and do it as part of an incident management service. Again, things to think about there are just the skill sets and accreditation of operators in that environment. Do they have a history of looking at CCTV, for example? You know, what standards do they have on the alarm center if it's in the security space? You know, what's their resilience and disaster recovery? You know, data sharing sort of agreements with them. How are they going to store that information, and where, you know, how they're going to delete that, and how's that going to be controlled? So there's some of the things to think about on that fourth element, which is a relatively new element to me on the body-worn side of things. I'll move on now just to some other areas. Got four other areas to have a look at. So firstly, what to record and what not to record. We typically are in the world of incident record solutions. So this is where people will press that button, will start the record. They either want to do it to record that evidence of that confrontation. They may use it as a de-escalation technique, and/or they may be using it to raise the alarm for us to monitor, or for themselves to monitor internally to get a response. You can move along from that and get into continuous recording, and sometimes where you've got what we call pre-record and post-record, which will capture say 2 minutes before an incident or 2 minutes after a recording stopped. Apart from the camera requirements we touched on earlier, you know, we need to think about how you protect the privacy of the public and people being recorded, going about day-to-day tasks. And as you move along that journey, you get into, I suppose, ultimately get into covert recording. I'd recommend steer clear from that. That's where in the realms of surveillance, covert surveillance, and into the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, the RIPA Act. That's really for a specialist area, that one. Moving on to making service users and the public aware. So, you know, what you're looking at there, as per the image on the slide, you know, it may be that you're putting posters up and signage up. It may be on leaflets. It may be part of sort of service user interaction sort of sessions, but making sort of best endeavors to make people aware that you've got that capability. On the cameras themselves, you'll often see they've got the sort of similar yellow stickers. They'll have lights on to record when they're making a record. And often good practice will be, if it's instant record, that user of the camera will make that person or people aware they're going to record as part of that as part of their process. So a number of things, simple things there. I'm a big fan of the next one down, standard operating procedures. What I recommend you be covering there is who can use these cameras, how they should use them, when they should use them, when they shouldn't use them. Likewise with the video management system at the back end, who's got access, under what conditions and criteria do they access that, and how's it going to be used. Right through to responsibilities, laying out clearly the responsibilities of the users, the administrators, the managers, the people who can access the VMS as well. So good standard operating procedures. I'm a big fan of those. And then we move on to legislation and guidance. Now this is a topic you could spend the morning on, this one, Nicole, but I'll briefly go through some recommendations at my end. So firstly, I'd start with BS 8593. This is a code of practice that's been around 2 or 3 years. It covers recommendations and guidance on the cameras themselves and features from the supplier that's supplying the kit. It looks at the VMS, the video management system requirements, looks at security and encryption of those recordings, both on camera, when it's transferring it, and at the back end. So that's always a good starting point. If you're then moving into the realms of data protection and GDPR, 2 areas I can recommend. One is the Surveillance Camera Commissioner has got a 12 guiding principles code of practice. And then you've got the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. There's a good document ICO in the picture. They're both dealing with data privacy and balancing the privacy of the public and people being recorded with the needs and the benefits of what such a system gives you in terms of safety and evidence capture. Finally, I'd look at, and again, a big fan of this, data privacy impact assessments. You know, when you're first getting into this, and certainly if you've not got CCTV or gone into detail as part of deploying CCTV, the DPIA process is a great process to go through. It covers how you're going to use it, how are you going to store that media, why are you storing it, who's got access to it, what control measures have you got in place, what deletion processes you've got in place, And especially if you've got linked to the supply, if you're using a cloud model, which cloud service, where is it being held? Is it held in the UK? Is it held in the EU? Who's got what's the accreditation security checks of people within that supplier organization that could potentially access your video? So it covers the whole, all the elements that get into that. So that's a DPIA process. And that, I think, is me done, Nicole. I've kind of jumped through it a bit, but hopefully keeps you on time.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. Again, some really fascinating highlights in there, which I think will be really useful for our audience. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to flag a couple of them up quickly to you, and then the rest will come back to you afterwards and do the same again on our website, if that's okay. But one was around, you mentioned good practice to alert the person that they're being recorded, be aware of covert recording and the RIPA Act. And one of the questions that we had was then, do you have to warn people that they are being recorded? Is that a legal requirement that you verbally warn that person?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't think it's a legal requirement. I think, it depends on the level of signage and the level of engagement you have and the awareness that people have in the environment of the person wearing the camera. In a lot of applications we're involved it's recommended that they state it before hitting the record button, and that's okay, it informs the user, but it's part of that de-escalation as well, potentially. Yes.
Okay, interesting one. I mean, I'm gonna put you on the spot now, because I'm going to ask you if you'll do an article for us about DPIA, because I think that's a really interesting bit that people really want to hear a little bit more about. So maybe we can get you to do a little short blog on that for us for our website, because I think that would be something that everybody would be interested in. Sure. But just you mentioned then kind of about the de-escalation process and the impact of body cameras obviously on the person that is being recorded. Would you agree there's also an impact on the wearer of the body cameras, that it changes the wearer's behaviour?
Yes, that's a good one, because from the studies and the anecdotal information that we get, and I've seen it myself, is yes, it captures everything. It's used as evidence. But in training materials, it's extremely powerful how people handle confrontational situations, and different people handle it differently. And you can, when you're looking at that as part of your follow up afterwards, there's good examples and not so good examples, and people can learn from that. I think people feel safer wearing the kit, and whether that impacts on their behaviour and up to a point. It's not a shield of steel around you. You shouldn't put yourself at further risk, even if you're feeling safer. As training material and lessons learned, it's hugely powerful.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, anecdotally, I must say, you mentioned the railways. We work a lot with the railways, and I know revenue protection officers, etc., that wear them. I can say anecdotally, we've been involved in incident investigations where actually the behaviour of the person themselves wearing it is different than it has been in previous incidents, because they're more aware that they can be heard, that what they're saying, etc. But it kind of gives them a tool to use as well, doesn't it, as part of their process? So that's good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And again, thank you to Reliance Protect for helping sponsor our event this morning. Really appreciate it. Couldn't have done it without you guys. So thank you so much.
No
I'm going to jump straight in now, if that's okay, to Matt Colley, who is from Loan Alert, who's going to talk to us about kind of embedding loan worker systems with the help of one of their clients, looking at kind of real world experiences. So are you there with us, Matt, somewhere, hopefully? This is where technology does it to me yet again. Matt, can you hear me? Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Matt. I think you need to restart my video, Nicole. I'm a little bit earlier.
Okie doke. Bear with me 1 second. Try that.
There we go. Perfect. Morning.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Nicole. I'm very well, and well done today. It's been challenging, I think, hasn't it?
I thought it was challenging trying to grab 200 people in a room together, but I tell you, it's much harder trying to do it on the internet. It really is. So thank you, and thank you everybody for your patience while we've had a few techie issues this morning. So Matt, I'm going to do the same again. Hopefully you're going to be able to control your slides. If you click on the slide to start with, you should then be able to move them forward yourself. If not, give me a shout.
Right, not a problem.
Doesn't sound like that's doing anything. There you go.
There we go. Perfect. Right, thanks very much, Nicole. I'm jumping forward a little bit. Patience.
Remember,
Right,
click once and breathe. Click once and breathe.
Exactly. Right, thank you very much. My name is Matthew Colley. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director of Loan Alert. Before I kick into the presentation, I'm aware of a question asked about our specific product earlier today. It has been emailed to me by Louise, so we will get back in touch with you after the event just to help yourself. We do have a range of videos, but as always, if we don't have what you need, we will provide a custom resource for yourself as we do for all clients. But on to the main reason for me being here today. I'm here today to talk about embedding loan worker systems within your organisation. And I thought the best way to do that would be not for me to talk at you, but to share the real world experience of one of our customers. So what is the reason that I've chosen this subject? Well, to be honest, we've discovered that customers have common pain points at various stages of their journeys towards a successful implementation of a loan worker system. And I want to share best practice around the stages of implementing a loan worker solution. So the steps we're going to be covering are justification, communication, implementation plans, cultures and habits, maintaining a system, and measuring a system. So these are broad headings that cover the various stages that companies of any size and any industry go through. They may be more involved for a more complex organisation, whereas a smaller company may be able to cover most of these steps in one, or a short number of meetings. So we spoke to Nicola Barnett of an organisation called Solo Housing, who are a charity working with young people with nowhere to live and who have used Loan Alert for many years. Nicola is Shared Housing and Lodgings Manager. She's the lead on the Off the Streets project run by Solo Housing. She's the lead on women's accommodation, and pertinent to this conversation, she's also the health and safety lead. Solo Housing have been very focused on engaging staff. However, this hasn't always been straightforward and challenges have emerged. So I felt that Nicola would be a great representative example, and I'm very grateful to her for taking the time to talk to me and share her thoughts. So the first step, justification. As a charity, Solo Housing have to evaluate spend very carefully, but this also bears true for any organisation. So we discuss some ways in which it establishes the value of a loan worker system to the management of the organisation. And I'll pass over to Nicola to talk in her own words.
Yes, it had, but obviously there were still hurdles that they were trying to get over. We are a charity, so we are non-profit. We have to be very careful what we spend our money on. But loan working and health and safety of our employees, of the whole organisation was paramount. So I don't. Because we're run by an executive committee, I don't think there was ever any doubt that we were, doing the right thing. It was obviously just making sure that it was cost effective.
So the conversation then evolved into how they assess how appropriate the spend is when their contract is due to renew, in terms of maintaining the budget and resisting cuts.
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, there are always companies coming out with new products, cheaper products. We just have to make sure that what we take on and what we use is going to be A, cost effective, be easy for people to use, because people do become very complacent when they're visiting people that they think they know and that they've been working with for a long time, and don't bother spending a minute to set up a visit on their app.
So we then moved into the conversation to the communication stage. I think people are naturally averse to change, particularly one that makes them feel concerned, in my view, unduly about privacy. Clear, consistent communications is a key method in managing natural fear. It's also important to communicate to communicate clearly so complacency does not creep in. So we discussed some of the challenges her colleagues had faced.
We also do have members of staff that are not IT literate. So we have to make sure that it's simple, it's cost effective, and it's quick and easy to be able to set it up and use.
So having gained an understanding of the concerns facing staff, we moved on to discuss areas where communications had enabled solar housing to make staff feel reassured.
I mean, we do rely heavily on our staff being open and honest with us and letting us know that if they're having problems with their mobile phone, because we all have the mobile phone app, if they have any problems, you know, things like that, where we did have last year actually where we had some members of staff that have been with us for quite a few years. They'd not told us about the problems they were having with their mobile phones, their work mobile phones. They hadn't got the capacity to put the app on their phone, so they just didn't bother. But they hadn't told us. So on knowing that, so obviously at the annual training, that was identified, and we got them all new phones so that it was able to take the app and anything else that they needed to do. But
so from my view, a takeaway from that is that things change, people change, technology changes, smartphones update. So communication clearly needs to be in both directions in an organisation to keep abreast of changing situation in the field. So at the next step, I shared some thoughts with Nicola on feedback and lessons I'd learned from talking to various companies and how we look to keep open communication lines with clients and end users. And apologies if I cringe, I hate hearing my voice on a recording. And I think sometimes I do think that people who are experiencing problems, maybe because of technological reasons, it's actually embarrassment that they don't understand, that they think they should, and they don't want to admit to a lack of knowledge or a lack of technical understanding to overcome and actually speak to us. And our answer would always be just, we're not here to judge or anything like that, and just ask us and we'll get you up and running. But and so leading on from this, a common concern with many clients is that a lone worker system is another method to spy on and control workforces. And so I asked Nicola her opinion on that.
We've never had we feel like Big Brother's watching us or anything like that, because we do make it clear that we're not there to spy. We are there. If it goes off, we know where you are. If we have a problem and you haven't checked in with us, we know where you are. You know, that kind of thing. So we also link that up with our Outlook calendar. So part of the induction is Outlook calendar. So when you go to a visit, make sure it's on your Outlook calendar as well as on the app. You know, that kind of thing. And if you do have a problem and you've got a low battery, or you know, you've kept it run, forgot to charge your battery up overnight, then we do a buddy up system.
So leading on from that, I asked Nicola about what wider communications they shared with colleagues who may not be frontline lone workers. What sort we focused, and to be honest, it's quite a common thing to do, is focused on the lone worker protection and the use of the systems, and in terms of keeping yourself safe. What processes have you put in place for when something does go wrong, in terms of, I believe you use our 24/7 monitoring response centre as a first point of contact, but in terms of in a genuine emergency, and so we are sending the police to notify member staff, then contact your organisation, or an unverified emergency where we pass it on to your colleagues to respond. Have you done any specific thinking or any procedures around what actions managers should take in those circumstances when they're being asked to potentially get involved with a genuine lone working incident?
Yeah, we have a full policy and procedure with regards to lone working. So that's followed by line managers.
Leading on from that, we moved into the implementation phase, and Nicola and I spoke about the different strategies utilised to ensure the lone worker system solar housing use is bedded in well and does not cause disruption. back when I started a few years ago, when I started with the company, I was doing customer training as well and delivering training sessions. And that was always the point I tried to impress on people. If you leave this training and don't switch the app on for 3 months, and then you go into a hazardous situation, you're really going to struggle, because the memory will leave you. If you then spend the next 2 weeks logging into the system when you go for lunch, when you get back from lunch, when you drive home, etc., the knowledge and memory then is embedded, and even if you don't use it for 3 months, you'll pick it up and it'll be like night as day. But it's very difficult to get people into that habit, really. It's thought of a lot about how I can get people to make it part of the routines, such as it becomes second nature.
I think part of our induction now, which has been included in the past probably 18 months, 2 years now, we have a separate amount of time that any new starter comes to me, and they shadow me on the Lone Alert app. We get it all installed for them, we show them, we do a test on it, and then when they go out shadowing with a line manager or their line manager, they are reminded that on any visit, have you done your Lone Alert app? Have you signed in? Have you created the visit? You know, that kind of thing. So on each visit, they know that this is what they've got to do. And once they realise it is literally 30 seconds to a minute to actually set it up, and then remember to unset it, then it works well.
Fantastic. So we moved on to the human element, which is one that all employees will face when implementing a lone worker system. But ideally, you'd be encouraging people to make sure their devices and phones were charged up and ready to go. And that, to be honest, that's something else that needs to form part of a routine, isn't it? To remember to get back from work, put your purse or wallet away, put your keys away, put your device on charge so it's ready to go in the morning. So after implementation, a key stage is to make use of lone worker systems cultural. I spoke to Nicola about how she forms these cultures and habits. You did mention a really interesting word there, complacency, and obviously not just with lone worker systems and personal safety. Whatever walk of life, complacency is an issue, I think, isn't it, within the workforce? Have you got any specific strategies for identifying complacency, combating complacency, specifically with regards to use of the lone worker system? I thought it was all going too smoothly then. You did mention a really interesting word there, complacency, and obviously not just with lone.
I think we've managed to move on, Matt.
Right. Give it a second just to catch up.
Yeah, we do have annual training, which is mandatory for all staff, including the CEO, our CEO. We make sure that every year we are doing lone worker training. Something that somebody said to me a few years ago, and it stuck with me, is everything is okay until it's not. And we try and reiterate that to our staff, and to the CEO. We're all accountable for our own safety. So yeah, we try and reiterate that constantly.
I'm going to just jump.
We do have annual training.
Just going to jump forward a couple of slides. I'm very conscious that that's quite a hard deadline for the next person, so just bear with me.
Where are we heading to, Matt? I'll help you out here.
Go to maintaining, please.
There you go.
Thank you. So basically, at this point, discuss with Nicola that in my experience, lone workers fall into 3 groups when using a lone worker system: the can do, the can't do, and the won't do. So I asked Nicola for her views on this.
Absolutely, and we have a health, safety and wellbeing working group that I head up, and that's done bi-monthly. So although we have the training annually, we also we're quite transparent in our working group, and we involve as many members of the organisation as we possibly can to have an input. We share the minutes of the working group, and it always on the agenda is always lone working. Absolutely, and we have.
Just go backwards now. Can you move me through to the measuring slide, please, Nicole? Brilliant. So just looping back to the justification phase, one of the keys for identifying performance is consistent measurement to understand how usage alters behaviour through time and to identify patterns of behaviour. So I asked Nicola for her view on measuring their lone worker system.
With regards to health and safety, we don't put a KPI on that. It is what it is, and it's reported hopefully as soon as there is an issue that arises or prior to an issue.
Just moving forward, please, Nicole.
There you go.
Thank you very much. So I'm just about to wrap up now. So I trust that you took some hints and tips and insights from Nicola. I did have to abbreviate it shortly to keep as close to the schedule as I can, but I believe this will be available afterwards, or you can get in touch with us and we can share the slide. But I thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And Nicole, or anybody else that's any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. If there's time for them, Nicole.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, technology was going so well and then completely collapsed on us yet again. I'm never, ever going to do this way again. If we don't do it next year, I'm coming around to everybody's house to deliver it personally, I reckon. We just got one question, and actually maybe you could just give us kind of in one sentence, can you give us one thing to consider when aiming to successfully embed a lone worker system? If there was one key bit of advice, what would it be?
Communication and trust between suppliers, employees, managers, lone workers, and all parts of the organisation. It's got to be open.
Fabulous. Yeah, fabulous. I think the first one is easy. Communication, trust takes a little bit longer, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So,
it comes from openness, in my view.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate
Thank
that.
you, everybody.
Very much. So look, everybody, we're now down to our last group of the day. As I say, it's been slightly chaotic, Heather, so I hope this goes slightly more smoothly for you this afternoon.
Oh, we
How's your morning been?
Well, can you hear me, Nicole, for a start?
Absolutely.
Perfect, because I've got the headphones on, even though it doesn't look as glamorous, because the dog walker is arriving and I know the dog will go mad. So anyway, yes, well, my morning has been spent doing a 45,001 lead implementer course, lead auditor course with British standards. I know, I'm not sure that that's yay or what it is, but I'm learning anyway, hopefully something.
Fabulous. So look, Heather is from Healthy Working Company, for those of you that don't know her. I always find her talks fascinating. I'm going to hand straight away and give you the remote control, Heather. If it doesn't work, just shout at me.
Brilliant,
so basically,
I will.
Click on the slide once and then you can move your slides forward yourself. But if not, just shout next.
Oh, yes, it's working.
Yay!
It's working. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for staying. I really enjoyed the last bit of that presentation, and I loved what was said about communication and trust. We're going to be talking a lot about that in this presentation too. So nice segue. So we're going to be looking at some of the considerations around hybrid working, just a little bit about who we are. We help people to design a well-being strategy, which actually looks at what a good day at work looks like, as opposed to thinking about things like necessarily training everybody on mental health first aid and that sort of thing. That is important, and we do the training too, but we start to look further back at what creates stress in the organisation in the first place. And that's really why I'm doing this course at the moment, because I'm wanting to help people to implement the new wellbeing standard 45,003. So there isn't a course on that at the moment, so I'm doing 45,001 instead. But if anybody's interested in wellbeing strategy, wellbeing training, or indeed in the new 45,003 standard, then please do let us know. So, right, our poll. Now, I'm hoping you've got the poll ready, Nicole. I'm just going to read through it. So before we start, let's. Oh, sorry. I think you've pressed my slides. Can you go back?
I can go back. I'm really sorry. It's
That's
trying
all right.
to do poll and this.
I know. Yes. So I'm just going to run through this because there are some distinctions in these questions. So, are you at the moment encouraging everyone to continue to work from home, everyone to come back to the workplace? Or are you looking at a hybrid model, which is quite fixed, shall we say? So fixed agreed days. For example, these are the 2 days that you as a team come in. These are the 2 days that you come in. Or are you looking at a hybrid model with the flexibility for individual negotiation? So in other words, you say to your manager, look, I want to work primarily from home. I'll come in if you need me, or something along those lines. So how much is it fixed? How much is it flexible? Or are you in the position, look, it's not even an option for us. Our work mostly needs to be done on site anyway. So please just fill out that poll and then see. And then I don't know, Nicole, how are the results coming in?
They are coming in. We've got about 55% of people have already voted.
Brilliant.
So we'll leave it just for a second there, just to let a few more people. So far, I have to say it's a hybrid model with flexibility that is way ahead. Which
now
is
that is very, very interesting. And that I think probably in a mature organization is what one should ideally be aiming for, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
I think from our perspective, a lot of our training obviously has to be done on site. There's not a great deal we can do about it, but we're still trying to add that flexibility so that when people aren't actually delivering training, they don't have to come into the office. They can do all of that other stuff at home now, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
That flexibility. So we've got about 80% of people have responded.
Do you want to
I
share then?
Share that with you if you bear with me a second, although of course now my screen has frozen, so bear with me 1 second.
I wonder if I can share it. Polling.
Carry on talking for a second.
No, I can't.
I've got it.
You got it. Well done, well done, well done.
There you go.
Woohoo. Okay. So, how interesting. That is because most of the clients that we're working with are actually looking at a hybrid model with very fixed agreed days, rather than flexibility for individual negotiation. We've only got one client that's looking at that. So it's very interesting that you are all looking at that direction, because I would have said that that was optimum. But I'm very interested that not many organizations seem to be going down that route. So thank you very, very much for that. That's just interesting to see where you're all at. So let's move on then. So
click again and you'll be fine.
There we go. Okay, so we have had a massive shift, haven't we, in what's going on here. So pre-COVID-19, it may surprise you to know that 44% of businesses globally did not allow any home working at all. But 52% of workers were working from home at least once a week. But it was a very different idea around working from home, wasn't it? It was kind of a bit of a favour to the employee. Maybe they had, they had to ask for it, and it was all a bit difficult because lots of jobs we thought could not be done successfully from home, did we? And then in the first quarter of 2020, we had to reorganise entire workforces to work from home, and it was really interesting because we spoke to Thames Water very early on, and they said that they had a customer service team of 200 people, and they had said to those people, you cannot work from home. And then within 2 weeks, they were all working from home with no loss in productivity, no loss in efficiency or anything like that. So very interesting. It's shown us what we can do, can't it? At the time, however, it was deemed by the Health and Safety Executive to be short term. So lots of the stuff, the regulations around lone working, remote working, display screen equipment didn't necessarily apply. And obviously, once we get to a point where actually this is a fixed thing we are doing on a regular basis, then we really need to start applying some of those. And now we're transitioning back into the workplace, and we're all at very different points, aren't we? Some are saying you've got to have masks, some are insisting on social distancing, some have not done that. Some are looking at a phased return. So they are, for example, doing something saying, right, we're doing this until December, and then we're going to do a survey of everybody and find out how it's working, and then we'll maybe review in the new year. And some, as I said, have been quite successfully surveying their workforce about what they would like. We've actually been involved in some of those surveys, and some of them have been very open-ended. What would you like? And others have been trying to get a particular outcome, which is quite interesting, and different approaches. And now here we are, a new potential way of working, hybrid working. Now, if anybody knows anything about this that I don't, I will be very, very pleased to hear from you. But I have done quite a lot of research in this area. And it seems to me that there's a lot of research around pure remote working. And there's a lot of research around what you can get done in the office. However, hybrid working, there really isn't much available in terms of how productive we are this way, what issues there are, how to tackle those issues. And I would suggest that when we've looked at some of these issues, whilst in some cases there are clear answers, there are not clear answers everywhere. So some form of continual review will be something that we all are going to need to build in. And I'm expecting to see burgeoning amounts of research in this area because there really isn't very much at the moment. So let's think about, first of all, the positives. Why is this a good thing? Well, we know that during the pandemic, when we were working from home, productivity in a lot of organizations went up. Now, sometimes that might have been at the expense of people's home life, but we do know that, we're not sitting on a train commuting, that wasted time. We're able to actually, able to get our head down. We're not at the water cooler or at the tea doing, having chats with people. So obviously two sides of the coin there, but we do know that there is a benefit to productivity. It can also improve morale and happiness because if I feel in control of my work schedule, if I feel that I don't have to ask for special permission to go to the doctor or to wait in for the man that's coming for the washing machine, or to just organize my life in a way that works for me, then I'm going to be happier, aren't I? It can improve costs. We can look at smaller office spaces. And certainly some organizations that we're working with are looking at that. They're closing certain offices or shrinking their office space. Recruitment can be considerably easier. I spoke to somebody very early on, a large pharmaceutical company, that was so excited about it because they said, we can now take our workforce from anywhere. We don't have to take you close to our head offices or our places where we generally work. And also certain demographics will just expect it moving forward. You might have heard about the great exit from the workforce. Lots of people are looking at resigning their jobs or getting a new job because we've really been forced to look at the quality of our lives, haven't we, during this period? Do we want to work in the way that we've been working in the past? And allowing that flexibility around where people work should aid recruitment and retention. We know less time spent commuting could be and should be, in theory, benefits to work-life balance, although that depends very much on the individual and the organisation. And we know there's a positive environmental impact from this as well, don't we? However, we have a lot of challenges in this area that we really need to think about. So first of all, we have organisations, and lots of you I'm sure will fit into this category. Some roles simply cannot be done from home. And therefore we have an us and them culture, which will develop in some cases, and certainly did develop during the pandemic, with people feeling a bit resentful. They had to be in, and then there were people at home. So how do we tackle that? Well, that is quite complex, actually. And again, there's very little evidence involved in what people are doing, which is working in this area. And the second one, I would say, also fits into that category. There are issues for diversity, equality, and inclusion. So we've spoken to organisations where they've surveyed the workforce, and the men want to come into the office, the women want to stay at home, presumably because they have childcare responsibilities, home admin responsibilities, which perhaps aren't there for the men. Or we have people such as young people saying, I want to be in the office. So a good friend of mine works at Facebook. She says they're having all the young people wanting to come back to the office and the older people want to stay at home. So how do we manage that challenge? Because those people that are in the office are going to be potentially more visible, aren't they? So how do we establish, career progression, those sorts of things? It can make it difficult to see that that person is struggling. It's easier to hide when you're at home. Cost, although we might have smaller offices, we do need to make sure that we kit out our homes and our offices, and we need to pay for that to get people the right chairs, the right equipment, so they're able to work, safely and healthily in both places. So how do we manage meetings? You remember the days of the spider phone? That was terrible, wasn't it? And now at least we've got video conferencing, but how do we manage that so that we get equal input from everybody? Half in the office, half out can be a poor experience. And the CIPD actually recommends that you do not do it that way. You say it's either everyone's out or everyone's in for a meeting. We've got mentoring new people and managing inductions, much more challenging. Can be worse for work-life balance. Well, obviously, you will all know, I think that this is, well, certainly we did some surveys during the pandemic and we established that this was the case, that in the first lockdown, when the weather was nice, when it was all a bit of a novelty, we were using that time we would have commuted out in the garden, going for a walk, doing those things which supported our mental health. By the time we got to lockdown number 3, people were just working really long hours. And we've certainly got some professions that have really struggled with really hard work and are actually sort of on the edge of burnout. So HR people, health and safety people who've had to work all the way through, very, very difficult. Then we've got a real case for ensuring your managers are not just technically competent, but they are empathetic, great at communication and great at instilling that trust that the previous speaker was talking about. That doesn't come naturally to every manager. And have you got the right managers in those positions that prioritize that? And are you training them to continually improve their skills in that area? So we're just going to look at a few areas that I think that we as organizations need to start thinking about now. And some of these will be really obvious and some of these might not be quite so obvious. So the first thing is rethinking the office. And I like this quote from the guy at AdTrack. Before it was, I go to the office because that's what I do to work. Now we want it to be more like, I'm going into the office today because today is the day I see people. So we're trying to use that day in the office to be more collaborative and get some face-to-face time. Has implications to how we design our offices, doesn't it? We need to think about collaborative spaces, hot desking, pods for teams, making them places that people actually want to go. One organization was saying our well-being should be improved by that day in the office. So how do we create an office space that actually improves people's well-being? Rethinking resources and technology. Now, first and foremost, have your people got the right resources to do their jobs healthily and safely from both home and at work? And I know that this is an area that Nicole specializes in, making sure that your home workers, your lone workers are set up, effectively so that they get trained in that area. And then this is interesting. Again, I've done some research in this area, and there's a general view that the technology hasn't quite caught up with how we should manage our projects and our communication when we're working in a hybrid way. So we've tried all sorts of things. I'm sure that you have too. We've tried project management tools, we've tried working with different aspects of Microsoft Teams, but there's a gap there which needs to be developed. And then, have you got the best technology to communicate with people? So rethinking our resources and our technology. Rethinking meetings. We've just had the conversation about should everybody be all in or all out for a meeting. If you are in a hybrid situation, perhaps think about a big screen on the wall where you've only got a limited number of participants when you've got that hybrid setup. And then we really, really need to think much more carefully about how we manage those meetings. So what type of meeting is this? Is this the CEO speaking to everyone? In which case it can all be online. He's doing a presentation and then there's some Q&A at the end. Is it a one-to-one? In which case, perhaps you'd be better to perhaps do a walking meeting with someone on the phone, or perhaps make sure that's a face-to-face. Is it a meeting with maybe 6 or 7 people in which case you can be a bit more flexible with how you organize it, but really to be driven by the objectives of that meeting. Does everyone need to participate? And an opportunity to consider meeting durations. Some tools are, for example, suggesting that everything should be 50 minutes or 20 minutes, or rather than a half hour or an hour. That then enables people to create a space between meetings. Because we have had this whole issue with Zoom burnout, haven't we? Where people have just been on Zoom constantly and it's really bad for us. And then if you're brave enough, and this is a fantastic suggestion, can you poll people afterwards? Was this a useful meeting? Did the format work? Did we get the objectives met? And then be brave enough to look at the results and go, actually, maybe we need to change what we're doing a little bit and make it a bit more useful for people. Now, here we have, I think, the most important aspect. Oh, it's really tough to be a middle manager today. It's always been tough because you've got the people above you who are looking for certain things from you and applying pressure to you. And then you've got the people effectively below you in the organization who you're responsible for, who you've got to protect and make sure that they're happy and all of those other things. So it's been a really tricky role. And now it becomes such a critical role in your organization. That the role of hybrid workforce managers isn't to micromanage productivity, it's to remove barriers and enable outcomes. So what we want to be avoiding is managers who are insecure, who are excessively monitoring their people, set unrealistic expectations, who don't trust their people, who think about such things as what hours are you working, what time are you clocking in, what time are you clocking out, as opposed to what are you actually outputting out? What are you doing? Are you realizing your objectives in that period? So let's think about what the role of the manager is. So firstly, involve your team as much as possible in agreeing those new ways of working. So, how are we going to handle meetings from here on in? What does work in terms of who is in and who is out? How should we manage our one-to-ones? How should we manage our projects when we've got a lot of people at home? Agree them as a team. Make sure that you do those regular one-to-ones in which you're asking them, how are you? I'm really being interested in the results as opposed to just, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Make sure that you do address conflict quickly. It can actually arise quite easily within these types of environments where people are maybe communicating by text or email more, and maybe they're not being quite as, some of the nuance doesn't come across. So address that quickly. Here's a really important one. Role model good well-being. You have no idea about how important your role is in doing this. And although an organization is obviously led by a leadership, every single one of us has the ability to alter that organization by good role modeling. So for example, do you take a lunch break? Do you send emails late at night and not put anything on them which says you don't have to answer this, or something which actually helps people to realize they don't actually have to be working at 11 o'clock at night? Are you generally trying to be as relaxed as possible? Just trying to think about what good well-being looks like and what you're showing your team, because what you're showing your team is what they will then consider to be acceptable. It will then mean that is what the culture looks like in your team. Be clear on the objectives. You need to build in some social connection time of some sort, some face-to-face social connection time. And ensure your people know your plans to be in or out. One of the organizations we worked with pre-pandemic, they had a flexible working policy, but they never knew where the senior managers were. So there would be nothing in their diary. They couldn't get hold of them because they were there were different rules that applied to them. And actually that doesn't really work, does it? So you need to make sure that your people know that. And then create an environment of psychological safety. Now, psychological safety is something we've talked about in health and safety for a long time, because we've thought about that if we have an environment of psychological safety, people are far more likely to report hazards when they see them, to report near misses. We haven't necessarily thought so hard about its role in creating a well-being in our teams. And actually, it's fundamental. So what is psychological safety? It's about we've gone backwards. Could you just put me back a bit, please? Back one, please, Nicole. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, bear with.
Thank you. So it's about creating an environment where people feel able to just be themselves, to tell you what's going on with them, to tell you, I don't understand that, or I think I've got a better idea, or look, there's that risk if we do that. People will suggest ideas and be more innovative if you are creating that environment. They will ask questions. They'll feel more able to voice that they disagree or don't understand. It allows moderate risk-taking, creativity, and breakthroughs. Project Aristotle, which was run by Google, which basically looked at the most effective tool for productive, creative teams said that psychological safety was the critical element. It enabled people to be more creative, more connected, more engaged, and more productive. So how do you create that? Okay, well, you're looking at a few qualities. You're looking at being able to be compassionate with your people, to create an environment of trust. So doing what you say you will, you know, keeping their confidences, or ensuring that you are actually open and transparent. Stability, so making sure that they feel that there's ground beneath their feet. There is stability in what's going on in the organization or in your team as a minimum. And then hope, creating hope around things like, you know, we've done this really well. There's some optimism in this area, because look, well done, we've done this really well. Or look, this short-term goal, we're going to be able to achieve it. So these are the sorts of things you want to be doing to create psychological safety. Now, let's be clear, psychological safety is not some fluffy thing, which means that you can't say what's on your mind. In fact, if you're doing it really well, you should be able to be much more honest with each other. There's a concept called radical candor, which comes into this as well, which enables you to be really candid with that individual, because there's a background of trust and stability, hope, compassion. If you create these backgrounds, you can have much more robust conversations with people. We used to talk about work-life balance, didn't we? And we're all experimenting with new boundaries now. So work-life balance is more about distributing your work and your life, weighing one against the other. Where do you draw the line? How much can you switch off? And work-life integration is much more about blending and coordinating. So it may be, you know, I've put the washing on this morning, you know, I've done some arrangements for some home admin. I've also been on a course. I've done various things for myself as well as being at work. And that's much more what work-life integration is about. Integrating your life outside of life into the working day, or vice versa. However, as we know, there are dangers inherent in that, because we do need to switch off at some point. It's very easy to just keep working, and we do need to take a break. Otherwise, we'll find that stress becomes an issue for our teams. All of us, you included, need to think about our own boundaries. I've talked about burnout earlier on. Burnout is a condition which was recognized in ICD-11 by the World Health Organization as a work-related chronic stress. So work-related stress that has not been successfully managed. And it's not too difficult to burn out with the right characteristics in an organization, in a manager, and in an individual. So it has all those three things to a certain extent have to be there. But some of us are more driven to burnout, and some organizations are set up for burnout in that they actually encourage that really hard work, that perfectionism, which is underpins burnout. So understanding your own capacity when you work best and when it becomes too much. So for me, I know I work really well in the mornings. I'm quite happy to start work at 8, but then when it gets to 3 o'clock, I really want to switch off, because I'm a lark, not an owl. Recognize how you can release pressure when you feel overwhelmed. So what works for you? Is it list making? Is it going outside and, you know, looking at the trees for a bit and doing some mindfulness or some breathing? What works for you to release pressure? Take control of the aspects you can take control of. So your time is something you actually control. It might not feel like it at times, but you do. And then let the things go that you can't control. What your company does next, or what's happened to the economy, would be among those. Ask for help and understanding if you need it. Call on your support network, your manager. Find human connection. Take time for yourself. And as always, consider your boundaries and expectations and communicate them. And it is okay to have boundaries and expectations when we're at work. We've got responsibilities to the work that are agreed. But beyond that, you know, we're not expected to work, you know, beyond those. Invest in training. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because we're a training organization, and I know Nicole is too. But basically, managers need to understand the role they play in their team's well-being. We can help you with this, by the way. We train people in we train your managers in that role in terms of how to manage your team's well-being, and then how to have a conversation with someone who's struggling in line with their legal duties. That is not mental health first aid, by the way, because managers have a set of legal responsibilities which mental health first aiders do not have. So that's something that we train in. And just we like to use this model because whatever we do when we're at work, when we think about well-being, we think about well-being as a relational concept. What I mean by that is it doesn't exist in a vacuum. I don't have good well-being outside of the environment that I'm in. So my well-being is impacted by my workplace, so the organization and the industry that I'm in. So how do we find out how people are feeling? We should regularly poll them. We should listen to them. We should make sure that we have a good feedback loop inside that. Are our policies user-friendly, and are they supporting people's well-being? Do we have resources, proactive and reactive? So, for example, do we have an employee assistance program? And what's our culture like? And then we want to look at our managers. We've already talked about how important our managers are in this piece. And then us as individuals, our individual circumstances, our boundaries and expectations, and our responsibility to look after ourselves, to make sure that we don't get onto that hamster wheel that means that we're working way, way, way too hard and we're not looking after ourselves. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you, that says. So if anybody wants to get in touch, you are welcome to. Find us on Facebook at Healthy Work. We've got a lovely, thriving group there. Find me on LinkedIn or just drop me an email. Thanks,
Indeed.
Nicole.
I do love the little pop-ups that come through from the Healthy Work Facebook. It always makes me jolly in the morning. In fact, it made me go out for a walk yesterday morning when I was having a bad moment, and something popped up from Facebook and I thought, yeah, that's it, I'm off for a walk. And it was kind of reminding me about my own well-being. So thank you for that, Heather. Appreciative of work that you do. We've had a few questions come in. We are run out of time though. So what I'm going to do, I've just got one I want to ask you because I just feel it's probably something that a lot of people online are thinking. So as a manager, and if I have a hybrid worker that I kind of picking up the signs that they are struggling, just give me a couple of tips. What can I do for that person?
Okay, so we have a mnemonic that we use, which is A, B, C, D. So A is awareness, just noticing that person is struggling, and then thinking about how to actually approach that person. So you might, for example, think, do you know what, I'm not going to have a Zoom meeting where I'm sitting opposite that person staring at them. I might be better to go for a walk with them, or suggest we go for a walking meeting on the phone, have a chat. So that's the first piece. B is be present. It's really hard for us as human beings to be present because our minds are always thinking about what question we're going to ask next. And so we just need to be aware that we're doing that, and actually then employ tools like summarizing what they're saying, asking clarifying questions, perhaps silence, just show that we've got it, because most human beings need to feel understood and heard before they can move on to a solution. C is the solution. It's co-create a plan. It might be as simple as we're going to meet tomorrow, or you tell me what I can do for you to support you, and I'll think about the same thing. But or it might be go to your GP, or it might be, have you call the employee assistance program and they agree to do that. And then finally is D for duties. Be mindful of your manager duties. And these are being aware of the Equalities Act, being aware that mental health can be considered, or mental ill health can be considered a disability under the Equalities Act, making sure that you're managing that in line with appropriate policies and in your organisation as well.
Perfect, thank you. I might collar you to do a little blog for us on the ABCD if we can, because I think it'd be something interesting that people would like to read more about. But thank you. As I say, we've run out of time, and I appreciate you've got other places you need to be. So I'm just going to say bye, and I'll speak to you soon.
Lovely, thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Heather.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. So that brings us to the end of our virtually conference this morning. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that has taken part. And that includes our sponsors this morning and our speakers, and of course you, our audience. I'm never going to do it like this again. We will be back at Lord's Cricket Ground next year for a proper face-to-face conference and event, because there's just so much more we can do. There's a lot of networking goes on in the chat, but it's nothing like what we can do when we're in a room together. And actually talking about lone workers, we need to kind of have the benefit of being in the room with other people, as opposed to still sitting where you are feeling perhaps a little bit isolated. So we're offering anybody that attended today a discount code, virtual 10%. Will give you an extra 10% off of whatever discount, whatever delegate rate applies to you, whether that's charity, whether it's public sector, or whether you're already a member of something like IOSH and get a discount. You can still add an extra 10% onto the top of that. So thank you so much. We will do slides available as PDFs if anybody is interested. Please just let us know and we'll get those out to you. And there'll be a summary and answers to some of the questions that we haven't been able to answer today live. Will go up on our website. And again, if you've registered for this or taken part in it today, we'll send out a link to you so that you can have a look at that on the website. What else do I need to tell you? Just go and take a break. We've all been sat down far too long now. So get up, do some stretching, go for a walk, get outside, do something for your own mental health and well-being, because I think we should all be listening to what Heather says. And I love the idea of work-life integration, but sometimes we still need to have those boundaries. So thanks, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed this morning. I'm going to leave you with the video from the HSE, which I know we showed you earlier, but just so that if people want to listen to it again, if they missed it, it's there. And we'll see you again next year. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
As an employer, you must manage health and safety risks before people can work alone. This applies to anyone contracted to work for you, including self-employed people. Risks are greater for lone workers without other people to help if something goes wrong. Lone workers include delivery drivers, health workers, security and cleaning staff, farmers, shop workers, and people working at home. You must train lone workers to identify hazards and control the risks. This will help them cope in unusual situations and know when to ask for help. Provide supervision in any higher risk situations you have identified in your workplace risk assessment. If an employee is at someone else's workplace, you must ask that employer about any control measures to make sure they are protected if working alone. Monitor your lone workers and keep in touch with them. Make sure they understand any monitoring system and procedures or devices you use. Put emergency procedures in place and make sure lone workers know how to use them. For example, having first aid equipment and how to use it on themselves, and raising an alarm in emergencies. New lone workers should also be supervised if they are being trained, doing a job with specific risks, dealing with new situations. Make sure you support home workers. You have the same health and safety responsibilities for them and the same liability for accident or injury as for any other workers. Lone working does not always mean a higher risk of violence, but it does make workers more vulnerable. Put measures in place to support any worker who's experienced violence. Workers can play their part by identifying and reporting incidents. Training in personal safety or violence prevention will help them recognise situations where they feel at risk and use conflict resolution techniques or leave the workplace. Lone working can cause stress and affect mental health. Put procedures in place to monitor lone workers so managers can quickly recognise signs of stress. If contact is poor, lone workers may feel disconnected, isolated, or abandoned. Remember to train, supervise, and monitor lone workers. Keep in touch and respond to any incident. By following these simple steps, you can protect those working alone.